I am going to, oh, and Don just did, Don, I was going to ask you to mute because we were picking up a little bit of background noise, but you beat me to it. So thank you so much for that.
I was waiting until I saw your face now.
Ah, that was the key, huh? So let me get to my agenda for this evening. And first off, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out on a nice, hot and steamy day here in August. The first item on the agenda this evening is a report from the Resolutions Committee. And I'm just going to give a little introduction to this since it's a little bit more involved than maybe we have done in the past. There's actually two parts to the Resolutions Committee report this evening. We've got 6 resolutions from member boards, as well as the Resolutions Committee itself. And I'm going to let Flora give a brief overview of each of the resolutions and the committee's recommendation and reasoning. We're going to need a motion for each of those resolutions. And I think the easiest thing for us to do for those motions is just to move that you recommend the VSBA board recommend either a pass, a do not pass, or a take no position on the resolutions. And I would use the recommendation from the committee as guidance when you form that motion for the resolution. And I just want to also remind board members that despite the position that the VSBA board takes on these resolutions, they all go before the full membership at the meeting in November. So keep that in mind as well too. Then the second part of this resolution stuff is a bit of cleanup work that I asked the Resolutions Committee to look into. And it was based on a review of our bylaws. Our bylaws state that resolutions should either be voted on as a resolution or a continuing resolution. And as I reflected on how we've sort of handled things in recent years, we haven't really done that. So what I asked the Resolutions Committee to do was to go through the existing list of resolutions that we have, see which ones they feel would have been continuing resolutions, and see which ones then should have been considered as regular resolutions, and clean things up. So what you'll see in the second part of the packet is the committee's recommendation on which of our existing resolutions should be labeled as continuing, and that's actually most of them. The ones that show up as an asterisk in the full packet there are the ones that they're recommending be considered as just a regular resolution. The difference between the two is that a regular resolution is then supposed to come before the board the following year, so the year after it was initially adopted, to either be adopted again for another year, to be deleted, or to be amended. Continuing resolutions essentially remain on our books, remain as a resolution until such time as they are either amended or then recommended for deletion. So the way that we were looking to handle this evening was to consider it kind of as a consent agenda. The resolutions that are recommended for either continuing or regular resolutions, I would like to see if the board would be willing to just sort of adopt that as proposed this evening, and you'll see that in the board packet. If somebody really needs to pull out a particular resolution because they're questioning the call that the Resolutions Committee made on this, we can do that. But in order to save time and hopefully a little bit of anguish on everybody's part, if we can maybe shoot to see if we could treat that as just a package, so as proposed this evening. Is there any confusion on anything that I said there? I'm surprised that there is no confusion, because sometimes it was confusing for me. So thank you, board. With that, I do want to then turn it over to Floor, who will hopefully guide us through the 6 resolutions that we have from member boards and also from the Resolutions Committee.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Neil, for that very clear explanation. We didn't have any questions. The committee as a whole was a little confused at the beginning, but we got it together. So first, I would want to start by thanking the committee. So Gaston, Don, Lori, Dan, Colleen, Jeremy, Judy, Nancy, Adrian, and Jim. And Sue and Neil also joined our first meeting. So a lot of people put a lot of work, but we were very efficient. And most important, Sandra kept us going, and the report is written by Sandra. So thank you, Sandra. We couldn't have done this without you. So let's get started. So everybody have their first resolution, number 1 by the Sheriff School District financial software in front of you. So just on a process question, Neil, do you want me to read the resolve part, or just go ahead and just do a little discussion of the discussion that the group had?
I think folks can sort of read
Okay.
the resolve part on their own. If you could just provide a brief sort of summary of what the committee discussed and why they took the position that they did on this one.
So the recommendation of the committee in this one was to pass. The discussion around this basically was in 3 points. We didn't think that we were necessarily overdoing it. There's some confusion in the e-finance system around different districts. This resolution, we felt that we will give the VSBA some extra information of how different districts are at different points right now, but mostly people are frustrated, right? That's what are really frustrated. We didn't, by any means, we're not saying that e-finance, by doing this, suddenly everybody's gonna abandon e-finance, and we understand that. The data that they're gonna be pulling out of this, we see it as important, but there is no experience of how that data is really being able to use yet. The AOE doesn't have a system, or we don't know what they're doing with the information yet, and a lot of districts haven't adopted. So regardless of the system, the reporting out would be important, and everybody agree on that. But as it stands, the recommendation was to pass this resolution. Any questions? Did I make it confusing enough? I imagine everybody is familiar with the e-finance discussion, right? See nodding heads. Okay. So do you want us to handle motions right after each one, Neil?
Yep, I think that would be the most efficient way to do it, yes.
Okay.
So I will make the motion that that we recommend that the full board pass this resolution.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Yep. Any discussion on that? I don't mean to jump in for, so if you want to.
No, I just, that was my question. I thought that you were gonna do that part. I do the motion and you do the voting, or do I do the voting too?
I am happy to handle it either way.
You tell me.
Okay, I will handle it.
Yeah.
So we
Okay.
have a motion on the floor that that the recommendation for membership is to pass this resolution by Dan, seconded by Jim.
Jim. Mhm.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Lori, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Lori. I need, we didn't say that this is a continuing resolution. So that means it's not a, right? It's not a continue. I didn't want to ask a question after you're finished, Neil, because I wanted to have an example. Okay. So anyway.
Yeah, so this is yeah, that's a good point, Lori. It's a regular resolution. Yeah, we will revisit this resolution next year. Thank you.
Any further discussion or questions on this? All right, not seeing any then. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Look around. That is unanimous. Thank you. Flora, you're good to go for the next one.
Okay, so the equal and equitable opportunities in any school receiving public funding. I will let you get to that page, number 4 in the packet. So basically the discussion around this is basically what it reads in Be Resolved. We just want not us, but people submitting the resolution that the Vermont requests that the General Assembly guarantee through law that all public and independent schools that receive public funds adopt and exercise the equitable opportunities in admissions. The discussion was exactly around that. And the only thing that we changed is that it said handicap, and we asked them to change it to ability. Other than that, there were no changes. Everybody was willing to, there was just that proposed change, and everybody recommended to pass as a continuing resolution.
Dan, go ahead. You're muted though.
My motion is that we recommend that this resolution be passed.
All right, motion on Mark Schauber with the second. Did I get that right?
Yep, I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion on this? All right, not seeing any then. All those in favor of the motion, which is a recommendation to pass, please raise your hand. That looks to be unanimous. Thank you, board. We're moving right along. Floor.
Okay, number 3, page 5, education finance. This was introduced by the Burlington, and this was the only one different from all other ones, that there were 8 other districts or school boards supporting this resolution too. We all felt like this was aligned with the VSBA recommendations to the VSBA motions that we had passed before. So we recommended to pass it, and it was unanimous. And this one was a regular resolution. And we will visit it again. Mark? Oh, sorry, Neil.
No, I was gonna make a motion, but first I got a question. Under the therefore be it resolved, it ends with PE. I probably should know what that stands for, but I don't.
I think it's an
A
error.
typo, yeah. It was not there, sorry, Mark. Yeah, we didn't catch it. Yeah, yeah.
All right, so I'll move that the whole board recommend pass on this resolution minus the PE.
Second.
All right, motion by Mark, seconded by Dan MacArthur. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor of a motion to recommend pass on this resolution, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous again. Thank you.
It's moving right along, page 7, independent school, pre-kindergarten and after school funding. The two main, let me see here. Oh, sorry, I moved to one. Okay, yeah, I had it a different order. So some summer programs this year were perhaps not came into light at the beginning. We were worried about any discrimination based on marriage. So we wanted to make that clear that there's no room for discrimination. Public dollars that support private independent schools and pre-kindergarten programs and after should be equal opportunities for all. So we recommend it to pass. And this will be a continued resolution. Adrian?
Sorry, I just wanted to make the motion to pass.
All right, so we got a motion to pass from Adrian, a second from Don. Is that a second, Don?
Yes, second that motion.
Okay. Is there any discussion on this? I see Dave Sharp, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. It's a formatting thing. Why is all that language crossed out? Is that original language, the language that came to us from the another school board, or is that last year's resolution or a continuing resolution that's being modified, or something else that I don't understand?
So I will let Sue and Sandra speak to that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank
So the language that's crossed out is verbatim the way the current resolution is written.
Yeah.
And then below the highlighted language is the proposed change. And it's organized slightly differently because some of the provisions 4 through 6 don't apply to after school and pre-K.
So this is basically a
Cleanup.
proposed amendment to an existing resolution.
Thank you.
Gaston.
Actually, Mark was first.
I always screw that up, man. How can I get this wrong?
Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Gaston. It's usually by order, top to bottom, Neil.
How about left to right, though?
I'm looking at the participants list, so. What was my question? Did the committee have any discussion on whether you all felt that this would apply to religious schools?
We did not.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, Gaston.
Sorry. So the only question I have or concern is, recall, I don't know when we talked about public funding and how the lawsuits were progressing in the courts. And there was this thing about a friend of the court brief that the National School Board Association had, said that they were interested in. So while not relevant specifically to this and or the other one, I just kind of wonder what the status is of that for another discussion, later on. But it just reminds me that, there was some other stuff going on with this as well from National. Over. I don't know if that makes sense, but over.
Sue, do you just want to briefly touch on that?
Sure. I've been in communication with the National School Boards Association. They've been watching the AHV French case closely. That's the one that they're planning to enter an appearance in. And they haven't, it hasn't become the right time for them to do that yet. And they're not quite sure exactly when that's going to happen, because there's a case that's been appealed to the US Supreme Court, and it's been accepted by the court for review, called Carson v. Macon, I believe is the name of the case. And it's out of Maine, and it's probably going to be determinative to several cases that are pending. So that's the update on the friend of the court situation.
Thank you, Sue. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think if I remember right, there actually, we did talk about the religious schools, Mark. Floor, maybe others will remember as well. And I think the sense was that's because it had just gone to the courts at that point. It was something that we felt was just way beyond what was worth trying to administer through our own resolutions here. So I think it was briefly brought up, and just, everybody threw up their hands and said, well, we can't go there yet. That's my recollection.
Yeah, I think you're right, Dan, but I think what I'm remembering now is that what we said is that this gave enough flexibility to Sue to use this resolution. It didn't necessarily was specific, but I think there's enough in that resolution for her to use it in those cases too, without making it too specific and sort of being broader considering our group. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. I lost
Mark.
Neil. Mark.
Yep. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if Sue was at that meeting. If she wasn't, Sue, do you feel that this, as written, would give you the flexibility to use it in regards to religious schools?
I think it does, because it doesn't say, it doesn't have anything about approved independent schools. It just says private independent schools. So I think you could categorize the religious schools as that.
Excellent, thank you.
Kim, go ahead.
I think I was going to say it felt to me as I read it, unless they were carved out to say, except for religious schools, that they would have an obligation through even other laws to have to comply in addition to whatever that do. That's how I read it.
Yeah, your audio is breaking up there.
Let's
for me.
read it that way.
Yeah, sorry. So your audio is breaking up, a bit,
I'm-
but I think what you said was that you think that this resolution would actually cover the religious school piece. Yes. Any other discussion on the motion? All right. So then I will look for a vote from the board. And sorry, this is regular or continuing, Flor?
I believe we said continuing, but we did not write it in the other notes. So Sue or Sandra, I have it as continuing, but
Do you have any information on that, Sandra?
Well, if we are making adjustments to with a resolution that we already have, then
yeah.
I would imagine it's continuing.
Yeah, as long as that, if we look ahead, though, this one was not tagged as a regular resolution in the review, was it?
No, it was not. It was not that. We left it open. We talked about it, but because of exactly what Carrie said, it was something that we were amending.
Okay.
We didn't have that conversation, but it looks to me like a continuing one, unless.
Yeah. Dan, you got?
I was just going to suggest that we make that a part of the motion. Now, I can't remember who made the motion and who seconded it, but could we make the motion that this is recommended to pass and specify that it shall be a continuing resolution?
It's Adrian and Don.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I would be willing to change or to change my motion to include that it's a continuing resolution.
And as person who seconded it, I agree with Adrian.
Okay. So with that modification, if there are no other comments or questions on this, then all those in favor of a recommendation to pass for this resolution, please raise your hand. And then anyone opposed? Okay, just want to make sure I got the hands raised. So that was unanimous. All right, thank you, Flora. You can go right along.
Okay, so we have a page number 8, equity and anti-racism. You guys had a chance to read that very important resolution. So the discussion around this resolution was basically excitement and the need to all have this conversation. And through this resolution, we're giving some guidance to both the VSBA, but also to all the school boards as a whole. Everybody supported the concept of using the equity lens. And at the same time, we feel that this supports the work that the VSBA staff is already doing. And we as a board need to continue to have that conversation and then continue to send that off into the other boards. We did spend quite a bit of time talking about it, and we all felt strongly that this was needed, and it's a start, right? And there was some discussion about the equity lens, and Sue made a great explanation of why it was when it was needed. So I think we recommended it to pass. And again, this one was not one that we labeled continuing or regular, but I would, we recommend that it's a continuing, but.
Thanks, Laura. And then just looking at this is because part of this already existed. This is additional language to an
Amending.
existing resolution, correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
So I will make the motion if that's okay with everybody.
sure.
And
So the floor's motion was a recommendation that this continuing
right.
resolution be passed.
yes.
I'll second that. This is Dan.
Okay. Motion by Floor, second by Dan MacArthur. Is there any comment or questions? All right, seeing none, then all those in favor of a recommendation to pass, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you, board.
So
I apologize. Can I just ask one question? And I'm trying to read it to see if I see it. And I know I fully support this resolution. I am thinking it's inward looking to our own practices. So and to that of the boards that we serve. But I am wondering if there's anywhere where we speak to advocacy for this sort of training for all agencies of the Vermont state government and boards. Is there a place for us as a voice in that?
The existing resolution language does say, in support of this goal, the VSBA commits to the following. 1, promote and support implicit bias training for all faculty and staff in Vermont public schools, including athletic and co-curricular personnel and officials across the state.
Okay, thank you. I think that does it too. I was thinking about sort of other boards and bodies, and that's great. Thank you. I was looking. I figured it was there.
Okay, so we'll move to the last one, page 9, appointments to the unified boards. So in that one, if you had a chance to read it, basically what we're trying to do is we want to make the resolution consistent with the law, which was repealed in July 2022. And the proposal for consideration that select boards can provide valuable input to the boards where there are needs to fill vacancies to the union district boards. Additionally, the collaboration between school and towns can also serve to benefit their communities. But this makes it clear right now, it was not consistent with the law. So we're basically trying to make it consistent with the law. Adrian?
I think this was the part of our meetings that I missed. Does the law say that unless otherwise provided in accordance with the Unified Union School District's Articles of Agreement?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Dave Sharp?
Thank you. Our board recently went through this because we had to fill a vacancy, and the language currently is vague. It is still a little strange. What does collaboration mean? If a select board says one thing and the school board says obviously has the power to appoint, I wish it were more clear cut where the power lay, but this is definitely an improvement over the current process.
Thank you. Kim Gleason?
Thank you. Dave, we also went through it recently in Essex Westford, and we're trying to sort of find specifics. And I think maybe it is one of those things that's somewhat more specific to the working relationship with your body. I mean, for us, it was very cordial, and it was sort of providing information and thinking about how we weighted the interview committee and, by towns, et cetera. So in a unified district, just trying to be mindful and sensitive, and maybe it's not. I would love for it to be more specific, probably Sue too, when I was calling her to figure out what I was supposed to do. But I think it may be one something that lends itself to some opportunity for flexibility based on your community and the relationship between the school district and the select board, or, you know, trustees, or whatever the body is that you're working with. But I shared your sort of quizzical, what next to questions.
Neil, should we have a motion a second before the discussion?
We can.
I can
But
move it.
I see Adrian's hand
Okay.
up.
Yeah.
You know,
My hand's up, but I'm not showing. I'll second it.
well, we have to have, Flora, did you actually make that motion?
It's okay. We can have Adrian and Kim. And I was just going to do a little explanation of something we discussed, but go ahead. Adrian, are you moving it?
Well, actually, I was just, I'll make my comment after the motion's been made.
Okay.
But
So
I
then
had
I'll go
another
ahead and make the motion, and it is continuing resolution. We also did not discuss on this one because we were making an amendment. So it seems to me that it has to be a continuing, or should we make it a regular so we revisit it again? I'm hearing questions on clarification, but
I would just say that it will remain an issue until it's fixed in the, I think they say they're going to be redoing all of the rules around unified school districts, but they've been saying that for a lot of years and it's not hit the priority list, so it keeps sunsetting. So I would like to see this be a continuing resolution, so any opportunity to have it come up or get shoved into something when it sunsets before they fix the whole unified section of the law, we don't have to worry about it coming up again.
All right, so just to be clear, I've got a motion from the floor with a recommendation to pass and that it be a continuing resolution. Do I have a second? Second by
That
Adrian.
wasn't the motion, I can be.
Yeah, sorry, Kim. I think your audio for some reason this evening is
Really?
not as good as it usually is. So it's breaking up a
Yeah,
little bit.
our
And I'm getting you a little
internet
bit late.
I apologize. Down and I'm through my phone, so I do apologize.
Okay. So just to be clear, I've got motion by floor. I'm going to go with the second by Adrian, but now I know that Adrian has a comment or a question. So go, Adrian.
I just wanted to say that our board just did this in June, I guess, and there was a lot of controversy. It made the paper more than once, and I'm sure it's going to come up in the next legislative session because Art Peterson is hot and he is not happy about it. And I would love to see it not be sunset at this time. And I don't really care which way it goes, although I'd rather it stays this way. But I very much would like them to make the rule solid and clear and permanent.
Thank you, Adrian. Colleen?
Yeah, we went through the same thing the past year. We essentially, because the rules were so vague, we made up our own rules. It felt like we were making up our own rules, but the full board agreed to it, where we found somebody from the town to serve on the district. But quite frankly, we did not go to our select board and do any kind of consultation. And so I do think that question about what does consultation with the select board mean? And I know from one community to the next, that could mean something very different. And so I just am wondering about the opportunity to revisit this again in a year after we've seen it play out a little bit more and maybe other bodies take a stand on it. So I would be in favor of finding some way to come back and revisit this in a year.
Yep, and that's not very hard. We don't have to find a way. We can actually just do it, right? So if there's a board out there that would like to amend the resolution next year or change it, even delete it, or if this resolutions committee of the VSBA board determines that maybe it's appropriate to amend it at that time, either of those options are available to us.
Neil, can I have one last comment?
Yep.
I'm stepping out early out of our meeting, and we're going through this actually tonight. And what I have, and this is the second time that we're doing, but I feel that why I supported this change, not change, but to stay with consistent with the law, is that I feel like in this one, even though it's a little murky, the legislators actually recognize that the authority of filling the vacancy was on the school board. So it's more how your clerk of the district or unified explains to or sends the letter announcing the vacancy, because that's clear within 30 days you have to announce the vacancy, and then explaining to them that, you know, the select board is always free, if they don't like the choice, to call a special election, right? So those three things have make it really clear, at least in our neck of the woods. Just want to share that. That's it.
Thank you, Flor. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, Flor, how can the select board call a special election for a school board member?
So on the town, if the select board or the boards of the town don't like the school board shows, they can call a special election. They will have to come up with a petition. It's a pretty involved process, but it's been done before. I don't remember the entire, we've gone through that before, but not on a vacancy. So I don't know the details on that, but that was the language. I had a conversation several times with Ken, actually. I think it's his name, Adrian, from your district.
Ken Fredette. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Ken Fredette.
yeah, and he is also very knowledgeable on this. But when I said that to the select board, they were all like, oh yeah, of course. So they knew. So it's just like, okay, that seemed to satisfy their stress.
Okay.
This doesn't come up in every district. It depends whether they're at-large members or whether they're elected in the town of as the representative of the unified court.
Yeah, but I don't want to distract the conversation either. This is just on this resolution. So I think we have a motion on the table. And back to you, Neil, sorry.
No worries. Gaston?
Yeah, sorry. So I'm on the select board as well. So I do not think that a select board just at a regular meeting call for for an election like this. I think that what Flor is saying is that they have to go through the same process that the community would have to in order to put a article before the community, right? So there's a form, and you got to get so many signatures, and they all have to be verified and all of that. But the select board, I don't think, as a different municipality, can push its wishes onto another municipality, i.e. the school district. So I think that's what's being said, but over.
Thank you for that. I'm seeing some head nods as well too to your comments, Gaston. Jeremy, go ahead. Oh, Jeremy's just clapping.
Oh, I'm using the wrong emoticon. Sorry. What is written in these charters when they create the districts? Because a town representative should be just that, a representative of the town to the regional board. Is that the town charter, or is that the regional? Like, do they draw up a covenant or a charter for a district when they create a school district? I'm not in one, so I don't know the answer to that.
Colleen, go ahead.
I'm sorry, did you call on me? Neil?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, okay. So when we consolidated our school districts, and part of our bylaws or charter that went to the State Board of Education for approval, we had to decide how we would be electing members to the school board, to the consolidated board. And we were essentially at the time in 2016 given options of how to do it. We could have members at large, they could represent just the town. And so that was part of our study committee's work, was to decide what would work best for our 5-town consolidated proposal. And so it does vary all over the state, depending on what people wrote at the time of the merger and put before the voters. So for our districts, which I know, doesn't apply to every district, our district chose to have members representative from the town based on the population of the individual towns, similar to a high school board at the time, unified board at the time. So it does vary from one unified district to another. And so one blanket rule at this time, I think, we have to reflect local culture, and that's where the role of the select board and school dynamics sometimes comes into play. But really the select board has zero authority over our school district. So it would be more of a courtesy of trying to maintain communications with another municipality, which I think is what Gaston was saying. It's more of a courtesy, supporting the culture of collaboration, but there's nothing in our districts that have our school boards going to the select board for any decision-making. And in fact, I think we've developed the culture over time that the select boards would be opposed to getting muddied into those waters.
Thank you, Colleen. Mark, I see your hand up.
Jeremy, I think a simple way to think of it is the school board creates their own ballot, independent of the town ballot. So it's not that it's not the town electing the person, it's the voters, the taxpayers with the voters of that town electing a school board member. So it's really two separate tracks.
All right, so I just want to be careful here about time, because I know that Floor needs to duck out here. Any other discussion on the motion, which is a recommendation to pass? All right, so if there is no other discussion, I'll look for all of those in favor of the motion. Please raise your hand and keep them up so I can do a quick look. That is unanimous. Although I didn't see Kim Gleason, I didn't see whether or not you had a hand up or not.
And reactions aren't even working properly in this limited service. So did it?
Still didn't catch that with the audio. Can you give me either a thumbs up or a raised hand in Zoom to let me know if you were in favor of the motion?
She was saying that she can't use her hands up adequately either.
Okay. Was somebody else able to discern what she said? Was she in favor of the motion?
I believe
Didn't
so.
catch that.
There
Maybe
it is.
texting.
I saw the hand real quick.
Yeah.
Okay,
There-
good.
there is
I will say,
Yeah.
okay, thank
I
you.
can text you. Yes. I'm just going to go with yes.
Perfect. Got it.
Did
So
you get-
that was unanimous. Thank you all. So Floor, do you want to, what time do you need to leave? Now?
Like in 5 minutes. Just
Okay.
my other meeting. Yeah.
So let's see how quickly we can get through this next section. So just a reminder for folks. So what you'll see in the packet in this next section is an attempt to determine which of our existing resolutions are continuing and which of them are regular resolutions. If you go through here, you'll see a few things. You'll see the motions that we had just reviewed also included in this packet, right? So you'll see some yellow highlights here. Those are in part some of the motions that some of the resolutions that we just reviewed. You'll also see in some sections a little asterisk that's highlighted in yellow after the name of the resolution. Those are ones that are being marked as just a regular resolution, meaning they will exist for 1 year after the body then approves the recommendation at this upcoming meeting in November. So they will stick around for 1 year, and then beyond that, if they're to stick around even more, it'll require a member board or the resolutions committee to propose that they either be continued, amended, or deleted. With that introduction, Flora, I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to say about this.
No, you explained it all, and that explanation, the key is right above. Sandra put it on, it's highlighted in blue and in yellow. So what we wanted to do is just pass it as a slate, if that is possible. Should we separate regular and continuing, or can we just pass it as a slate?
I think that I would just pass it. So this is the recommendation of the resolutions committee as proposed.
Yeah. So
and I see Dan's eager to, I think he might even have a motion.
I do have a motion in order to get floor within 5 minutes. Is that we recommend that at the annual meeting that this entire document be accepted as modified.
And Amy McMullen seconds.
Okay, motion by Dan, seconded by Amy. Any further discussion? Dave Sharp, go ahead.
So just to be clear, the second iteration where the yellow's all gone is the motion is to accept that. Is that correct?
yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right. All of those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand, leave it up so I can get a good look. That is unanimous. Thank you, board. I know that this was a little bit painful, but I think it's the right way to go, and I'm very happy to bring forward to membership the having this all cleaned up, and so I think it puts us in a really good position moving forward. So thank you to the resolutions committee and the floor for your work in getting us here. I really appreciate it. The floor is frozen.
Because my internet is being spotty now too. That's not a good sign. I apologize. And I'm going to step into my other meeting. Thank you.
Okay.
Everybody.
Thank you, Floor. Thank you so much. All right, gang. We are
Bye.
going to move along a little bit behind in our agenda, but I think that we'll be all right. We're going to move on to our next topic, which is a leadership offering from VPA. And I will turn it over maybe to either Sue or Susan, maybe for this next one.
Susan.
Susan, okay.
So I am also suffering with spotty internet. I hope you can all hear me. Forgive me for having my video off, but I think that helps the audio. We were approached by VPA I'd say about a month ago. They have a long-standing relationship with the Center for, Collaborative Leadership, I believe is the name of the organization.
Creative leadership.
Sorry, I knew I was gonna mess that up. Thank you. Center for Creative Leadership, based on a long-standing grant that they received years ago. And they came to us to offer us participation basically in that grant to the extent of having 2 courses offered by CCL, which I do know the acronym for. And after some discussion, Sue and their representative, Mike McCraith, and I came to the conclusion that what might make sense was to do one section, if you will, of each of 2 courses, offering one specifically to all of you as the VSBA board, and offering another one to begin later into the fall for all board chairs with a attendance cap of 25. So in your packets, you have some explanation about the Burn Bright course, which is the one that's being offered to all of you. And I'm really here as a catalyst to introduce Susan Rosetti, who is here from CCL, the Center for Creative Leadership. She will be our course manager, and she's here to tell you a little bit about the course and answer preliminary questions. The one thing I want to stress before I turn it over to her is you're all invited to participate, but I will need to know by end of day tomorrow what your hopes and dreams are about your participation, because I need to get a list to Susan by the end of this week. It's an online course. She'll tell you all about it. It's asynchronous, so it's on your own time. So they need to have knowledge of who's participating. So with that, I will mute myself and turn it over to yet another Susan.
Hello, everyone. As I've been introduced, my name is Susan Rosetti, and indeed I work for the Center for Creative Leadership, and I will serve as the course manager on an upcoming course that is available to you to take called Burn Bright, the Resilience Advantage. So it's a course around grit and resilience, which if it wasn't an issue for you prior to COVID, for most of us, I think COVID has definitely tested our capacity for resilience and for going with the flow and shifting and doing about faces in the midst of new data constantly. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oh, could the host please give me co-host capability so I can go ahead and share?
Yes, I'm doing it right now.
Great. Great. Perfect. Thank you, Nancy. And can you guys give me a thumbs up that that looks good to you, that you can see the screen properly? Great. Thank you so much. So what I'm going to do is give a little bit of background about the idea behind, or sort of the thinking behind, the creation of this course and the context of the course, and then get into sort of the content and how it's organized, so you can make a decision about if it's something that you're interested in participating in. So agenda, an overview. I'm going to talk a little bit about the role. There is actually a moderator, and that's not me. I'm the course manager. So I'll explain those two different roles and talk a little bit about the role of the moderator, and then talk about sort of what to expect, best practices and logistics, just so you can go in with your eyes open. But it's a fantastic, I can say before at the outset, it's a fantastic course, and I have been the course manager for maybe 3 of the Burn Bright programs, and people have really, really loved and gotten a ton of value out of it. So this course was created prior to COVID in terms of the brain trust at CCL coming together and creating a course on resilience. And they sort of came to it from the viewpoint of hearing a lot about workplace burnout. So the World Health Organization defining burnout as referring specifically to a phenomena that in particular we're seeing heavily in the United States, to the occupational syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress. That is, and some of the symptoms of this actual syndrome is feeling energy depleted and exhausted, increased mental distance from one's job, negativity, and of course, reduced professional efficacy. People just not feeling like they are working at their best. I can say for myself and speak for myself that I definitely over the last year have seen this come upon me in spite of my best efforts to do everything to really be mindful of my time and my physical being. So
So I'm sure I don't know, all of you are coming from different points of view and sort of different experiences, and you do not have to put it in the chat, but normally I do a kickoff meeting where I have people who have already signed up, and just to get you to think in the space of like, think about yourself at your worst and sort of how you feel when you bring your worst to your professional life and to your experience here. And think of some adjectives in your mind. And if anybody wants to call one out or two out, that would be wonderful. Amy, yeah.
Yeah, feeling really negative when I'm usually pretty positive overall. But just thinking when someone says something, my first inclination now is to just say, instead of, oh yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah. And anybody else? You can put something, oh, anger. Jay Murray put anger. I can say that I get defensive and quick to get defensive. So now flip it. So how would you describe yourself when you bring your best self to this meeting, for instance, or to what other, all your other roles that you play? Engaged, we got someone. Hopeful, optimistic. Creative, a team player. Prepared. So these are wonderful adjectives to describe what is possible when you have really taken control of how you move through the world and done things such to build your resilience. And so that's what this course gives you an opportunity to do. Going back to sharing my screen. So what this course gives you an opportunity to do is to actually try and create and take a look at practices that you have in your life that are either enabling resilience or creating burnout and shifting from a place of burnout to burning brightly. So it's designed to build, engage, motivated, and recharge you, and for you to build your own self-awareness around habits and patterns of behavior and micro habits that create an environment and a way for you to restore your energy on a regular basis. So you're taking inventory of your energy. You're thinking about how you can recharge physically with sleep, movement, and nutrition, how you're recharging mentally. For those of you who are perhaps introverts, how you do that on your own, or those of you who get energy from others, what social engagements you're putting yourself into to get energy from those social connections, and then maximizing these small ways, of, I'm gonna have to figure out what just happened there. Pardon me, just a moment. Maximizing ways to practice small behaviors to build your resilience. Why is that not forwarding? So what the course is, it is an online course, as Susan Holson mentioned at the beginning. It's a 4-week course, and it begins on Monday, the 23rd of August, and it runs for a full 4 weeks. So that's probably an important detail for all of you to know. It's wholly online, so it's what's considered an asynchronous course. I'm talking to people in the education field to may be familiar with that terminology. So it's wholly asynchronous, although there are ways that we build engagement, and I'll talk about that. But it's online, meaning that it's on demand and you can access the learning platform at any time, 24/7. So that gives you a lot of flexibility regardless of what your schedule is. That said, it is structured because there are weekly lessons and content that's sort of structured on a weekly basis. So you know what you need to do and you can get through the material at a weekly pace. We do actually have threaded in the ability to be highly interactive in spite of its being asynchronous. And the way in which we do that is build in two different things. One is having a moderator who is constantly observing the class, going into the platform and chiming in on group discussions where that can get quite lively with group discussions. And then in addition, providing you with individual feedback on some of the materials that you're working on as an individual. So there's both the peer support that you have, you're taking this course, with others, and in this particular case, with your peers on this committee, as well as moderated support. And then the other thing that makes it, I think, really valuable is it's not just theory, it's actually theory and practice that come together. And all CCL courses are structured in that way. So I'll go into a little bit of detail about it. So regardless of whether or not the Center for Creative Leadership is designing something for online or in person, there's always content that brings the theory and the best practices of what's out there around a subject and introduces it to you, and then has you apply it automatically. So everything doesn't just remain in sort of the theoretical mode. So on the learning side, what the work that you do as an individual in this course is, here are the topics. So in week 1, you're taking a look at your resilience baseline, kind of taking stock or taking inventory around where you are in certain factors around your own personal resilience. And this is something you don't necessarily share with others. It's just for you to sort of get you in that frame of mind. Then you take a look in week 2 around what you do to recharge physically. And that would be both, or not only around movement and in exercise, but also food, hydration, and sleep, recharging mentally and socially, and then bouncing forward, practices that you can put in place or have already put in place that you maybe have let fall by the wayside that you want to resurface to work on your resilience. In each case, each week, you're introduced to the concepts through usually little self-assessments, through a series of short videos that introduce the content. And then the structure is always introducing a concept to you, usually through a video and some readings, then asking you to reflect on that content and relative to your own personal experience, and then discuss it with the group. So it's pretty much the same structure week to week and lesson to lesson, is always engage with material, reflect on it, discuss it. So that's the learning portion. And then always baked into all the way to every course of CCL is applying it. And there's really 2 different ways in which in this course we have you apply it. Week to week, we'll have you do work on Burn Bright boosters, and those are directly related to the content, and they're like simple downloadable PDFs which have you take inventory and take stock of where you are in certain areas. So say you want to download the one because you want to focus on movement or you want to focus on hydration. There's certain little Burn Bright boosters that have you keep track of what you're doing and make note of where you have good practices and where there's opportunities for you to take on new micro habits. And then in addition to that, throughout the entire course, you'll be working on your Burn Bright blueprint. And that is really a blueprint or a roadmap that you'll be working on for yourself around what do you want to do after this course ends after 4 weeks in terms of keeping what you've learned alive for yourself beyond the 4 weeks of the course? So that's what the Bird Bright Blueprint is. The other thing I want to mention to you in terms of you're considering taking this is thinking about this course as a leader and not just as an individual. So there's kind of two frames of reference that you can engage in when you take a look at the material, and you can think about, well, I want to take it as an individual because I'm actually struggling with my resilience. I'm finding myself burned out. But you also may want to think about taking this from the standpoint of that you're a leader in your community, you're a leader at your school, you're a leader on your school board. And to the extent that which you need to create a culture or a ecosystem around you that supports the resilience of others, you also can think about it through a leadership lens. It's like, what are you doing to support the resilience and leadership of others? And that is another way to sort of engage with the material and think about, like, am I creating an environment? Am I creating a culture in my school district, on my school board that allows for others to have resilience practices? You know, like as a small example, do I expect people when I send an email out to reply within 5 minutes? Do I, like, what are my expectations? What are the signals that I'm sending out to others about practices that they have? Am I giving them, allowing them time to rest, take in the evening? Am I allowing them to take a vacation? That kind of thing. Those are ways, that is a frame of mind that may be really valuable for all of you in your roles at your schools and on school boards to think about in terms of your own leadership. Now, this is, I don't need to really go into this. What I'm trying to articulate in this slide is that you're not alone. So unlike a webinar where it's just you as an individual engaging with a bunch of material, you'll find these courses at CCL and this resilience course to be really interactive. Like, you're really engaged, and people who participate in the group discussions, there's a richness there that you get from your peer interaction that really is very different from like kind of a boring old webinar where you're just being taught at. In addition, having somebody who's a moderator who brings a wealth of experience as a leader and leadership, and in this case, around resilience, really adds another dimension and another richness. So the person, she's not here with us today, but her name is Toti Kavidad, and she has actually, I've done a couple different resilience courses with her, and she's fantastic. She lives south of the border. She speaks fluent Spanish and English. She comes from a deep background in leadership development, but has a really particular soft spot for this resilience course. Without going into any personal details on her history, let me suffice it to say she's had some incredible tragedy in her life that has caused her to have to face and really build resilience in ways that many of us would not want to consider, has had some serious family tragedy. And so this has a really wonderful soft spot. And what I can do after this is actually send her bio along to Susan. She can share it with you so you know a little bit more about her. But I'm like the cheerleader, the course manager. I'm administrator behind the scenes, helping you if you have any sort of technical issues, or you fall behind, or you have a question, or want some additional resources. And she's the content expert. So the other thing that's really important for you to know, I've given you a taste for what to expect and what you would get. So the benefit of this is that you would leave, if you're feeling burned out, or if you're a leader where you really want to sharpen your skills in creating a culture of resilience for those who work with you and around you, then I think you should really take a look at and consider doing this course. And it'll be really fun because you get to do it with people that you work with and know and love, and probably really would create a great culture amongst the 20 number of you there. But in terms of what you need to know going into it from a time commitment is that past participants really say to get the most value out of the course, expect to spend about 3 hours a week. So what I recommend to people is that they go in 3 or 4 times a week into the platform and plan to spend like 45 minutes at a time and going through the lessons. And really as best you can to trying to commit to the weekly pace. One, because otherwise it can become really sort of overwhelming. Although the content in this course, I have to admit, is not, there's not a ton of it, and it's not rocket science. A lot of it will be familiar to you, all of you, particularly if you're coming from any type of educational background, if any of you are psychologists or coming from any type of educational background, a lot of the concepts may not be new to you, but what may be new is actually spending the time, taking time for yourself and taking stock of these practices for yourself, and also engaging in conversation with others. So, that's really valuable to keep at the weekly pace, but also keeping on pace is helpful because you are then engaging in the weekly group discussions together. If you get off pace by a week, people have moved on to the next week and you're kind of behind. So all of a sudden it becomes a course that you're doing by yourself. So I highly recommend to try and keep on the weekly pace. If you have to work behind or get ahead a little bit because of a vacation or some days that are coming up, there's high holidays in September that may be an issue for people. Life happens. So we also really recommend that people, be an active, sort of commit, like to jump all in with your feet, and be an active learner and engage and challenge yourself and be really brave and be really thorough with the material, kind of challenge yourself to push yourself and to post comments in the chat, to reply to people. One of the ways in which we sort of measure engagement is that people can earn these things called impact points. So we issue a challenge at the beginning of our kickoffs for people to earn 200 points during the course of the 4 weeks, so that we because we run this course with hundreds of people before, we know if people are engaged, that's about how many points they earn on average for a highly engaged cohort. And, really lean on the moderator, ask Toddy questions, ask your peers questions, and share best practices around your resilience practices in life. So that's really what the course is all about. And this is just giving you a sneak peek to what it looks like. So what happens is if you decide to take the course and it starts again on Monday, the 23rd, you let Susan know right away and we'll get you registered. And then next Thursday, which is the Thursday before the course, you would get an email from CCL, support@ccl.org, which will enable you to establish your login credentials. And then on the day that the course starts, you'll be able to get in, you'll get another welcome email. And this is what you'll see when you log on. This is just week 1. So each week has these 4 modules where you click on the picture. So lesson 1.1, welcome to Resilience Advantage. That opens up, and under each one of these lessons is a series of activities for you to do. You can work on your blueprint by going directly to that little gray button in the right-hand corner. You can reach the moderator directly by hitting the moderator tab. And when there's new information, the notifications section will indicate that there are new messages up. And if you need help, there's a way to get help by hitting the help button. But this is just a simple way. And then there's images for lessons for 4 lessons per week for each week. So there's 16 total. And then this is just the date, so that for those of you who like to put things in your calendar. So the 16th, the week of the 16th, I will send out technical instructions. So next week, Monday, Tuesday, the login credentials come in to you on that Thursday. The course starts on the 23rd. It officially ends on the 19th of September. And those of you who are registered in the course will have a couple extra weeks to log on to the platform in case you missed anything or you got a little behind, or you want to download anything. You can download your takeaways, like anything that you highlight, material you found particularly interesting, or you and we create, so you kind of have the ability to create your own journal and your own with PDFs and other attachments, and you can download it at the end of the class. And so what I invite you to do is let Susan know right away if you're interested in taking it. Start thinking about your self-care and your resilience challenges and your practices, and plan your schedule. And then I'm just going to pop out of here and shut up for a second and actually let you guys let me know if you have any questions. You know, I was going through a lot, so if I didn't speak to the benefits or kind of really compel you to take it, let me hear what you're thinking.
Anyone have any questions for Susan? It was really, I mean, it was quite a comprehensive presentation. So I think the lack of questions is actually a good thing at this point, not a bad thing.
Yeah, I really invite you to consider it. I think it's a great course. I've taken it myself. And I think that it's really an opportunity for you to take stock of your own resilience practices, think about how you show up in the world as a leader around resilience, and not very many people take the time to do it, right? I think that, like, I always learn something, and even as the course manager, I have a tendency to sort of take the course along with you and do different practices along with the participants. And I always find something new to practice, new values around micro habits to really re-energize myself when I find myself waning. Anyway, if anybody has any questions, I'm going to put my email in the chat. So if you have a thought, or if that I didn't address, or that for whatever reason you didn't feel comfortable asking in this context, please feel free to reach out to me. And thank you so much for your time, and good luck with the rest of the meeting. I know you've got a bunch of stuff on your agenda.
We do. Thanks so much for coming out. Thank you especially for the offer, and we greatly appreciate it. And for folks that are interested, please get in touch with Susan Holson before the end of the day tomorrow, so that we can get you in and registered to take part in this.
Yes, and if there's anybody that's not here that because they had a conflict, please let them know, that was supposed to be in this meeting, that this is available to them as well. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Susan, thank you for joining us during your vacation, particularly.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm like not practicing what I'm preaching on the resilience side, aren't I? See you later. Bye-bye. Thank you.
All right. We'll get back to the agenda, and the next item up is the COVID-19 advisory memorandum. Hopefully folks saw the guidance that came out from AOE and the Department of Health. But we've got some additional developments on that end, and I think I'm going to turn it over to Sue to fill us all in on that.
Okay, thanks, Neil. So last week, the AOE and the Department of Health issued a guidance. It's actually an advisory memorandum that is in your board packet. Because the state of emergency ended in June, that memo doesn't have the same force of law as the formal guidance that you're probably used to seeing regarding COVID that was issued when we were under a state of emergency. So it's important to understand the context, because it really shifts the decision-making responsibilities back to the local school districts. There is a section of Vermont law, 16 VSA section 834A, that states that each school district and its employees owe its students a duty of ordinary care to prevent the students from being exposed to unreasonable risk from which it is foreseeable that injury is likely to occur. And so we wanted to give you some additional information, which we're going to be providing to members tomorrow. yesterday, the Vermont chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics issued a guidance on masking and return to school, which differs from the AOE and Department of Health advisory memo. And additionally, the CDC updated its guidance last week. So we're going to be issuing a memo tomorrow jointly with the VSA and VPA, providing all of this information to local school officials in more detail, so that they have it, so they can make the best decisions possible for their district. And we'll also be letting them know that local pediatricians have offered to collaborate with school officials to help them figure out the best ways to keep children in school and safe during this interesting time that we're in right now with the Delta variant. So really that was we just wanted to provide you with that information, and you'll be getting the memo tomorrow.
Thanks, Sue. Gaston, you had a comment, question?
Yeah, thanks. So coming from Orleans County, which is one of the three, one of a number of counties in Vermont that are red. The question that I have, or the concern rather, is that while we were in a COVID state of emergency, if we decided to go to a remote learning platform, it counted as a school day. And is my understanding that, I've read this and I know that there have been discussions and the like, but the concern is that if we're truly trying to protect our students, right, and we need to go remote because of, whatever issues, why isn't the AOE open to counting that as a school day? Otherwise, I think this is really problematic, and it's puts us in a real sticky bind, if you know what I mean. Over. Thank you.
Thanks. Sue, do you want to address that at all?
Unfortunately, I don't know why they've taken that position, but you're right, Gaston, that is their position.
Kim, go ahead.
So hopefully I'm doing better now that power's back. Anyway, I have asked about this as well at the state board, and apparently, the AOE's pushback, or Dan's pushback, is that in the absence of a state of emergency, it's like a rule change, which is an extensive, lengthy process. So I invite people to think creatively about what ask might be able to be made of the State Board of Ed to, or the AOE, because the way that it happened before, outside of waivers, let's say you have a water main break and you want to come get a waiver of the day, that'll come up on the agenda at the board meeting as a waiver, an exceptional situation with a recommendation from the secretary. Is there some sort of workaround that allows for that sort of proactive, in the event of needing to close, with schools, able to shift to remote, can those days? I don't know what that answer is, but I think you're getting the gist of what I'm suggesting. I would like to think about both as this organization and what ways might there be to create some flexibility in this time in the seat requirement that could be more proactive. I asked about it like before we were surging with Delta variant in the context of taking the opportunity to, if you're going to have a snow day like we did last year, we shifted and went remote, and that is no longer available because we're outside of the state of emergency, which is just, I think, terribly unfortunate to have taken something as immovable as education and turn that Titanic because we had to, and then, not capture some of the things that were beneficial to students and families and education in general. But I got frustrated with the response in that venue. So I don't know. So if you have any thoughts on what could be done and what asks could be made that could allow for more flexibility on a proactive basis?
I would need to take a look at the rules more closely, but I'm happy to do that. And we can put it on the agenda again.
Jim, go ahead.
Okay, just read something today about the state outsourcing contact tracing. And curious about how that might impact, since schools were part of the contact tracing system last time around. Are we anticipating some change from the way things happened last school year, as far as, you know, if there is an incident?
Do you happen to know, Sue?
No, I don't know. I can try to find out though. You're specifically asking about contact tracing, Jim. I did see the information that they're using an outside company now. But
well, there were a couple of facilities that expressed, you know, some upset with the fact that, you know, the last year, the Department of Health and all, you know, would seem to be on top of things. And the comments from people who had incidents recently, including like, you know, childcare and stuff like that, was that they didn't hear anything for a week. And, you know, just including when they sent information, you know, in. And that's a concern for me that, you know, essentially if our schools, I think our schools played an important part in the whole contact tracing last time. And if they're going to be able to do that again, they need support from, you know, somebody representing the state.
Thanks for that. Kim?
I guess I would just add to that, if there are privacy concerns with a third party, and schools as part of the process have our requirements regarding privacy assume our partners at the state did, and I would imagine if they're outsourcing, they must have some sort of arrangement for that as well.
Sue, I wonder, based on some of the discussion that we're having here tonight about some of these other items, if it's worthwhile sort of pulling these other concerns together and maybe, you know, reaching out to the AOE on some of these items to see if we can get some clarification.
Yes, we can definitely do that. I believe some of the concerns have been raised with the secretary by, he meets with the superintendents weekly, but we can certainly contact him directly.
So folks will do that. If any other items pop up that you think of, get them over to Sue and or myself. And then we can do a reach out. Can't guarantee you that we're going to get some information back, but we'll do our best to shake the tree on that one. Any other questions that are related to the COVID memorandum? So anticipate some guidance coming out, as Sue had mentioned, from VSBA, VPA, and VSA sometime tomorrow, I believe. Hopefully boards will find it helpful, at least as helpful as we can be in this time when there seems to be some, you know, we may not be operating as efficiently as possible in this scenario. So we're just sort of working with the rules that we've got at the moment.
Neil, this is Don.
Yep, go ahead, Don.
We had a school board meeting last night. We had people present who were very upset that we moved forward with advisory and required students to have wear masks until we reach the 80% level. I said at the meeting, I didn't think we were on an island, that I thought other school districts were probably wrestling with the same issue with groups of parents. I'm just curious if I was inaccurate in my sharing, or are other directors here tonight finding that parents are showing up? And we were told, you know, if you don't do this, then you're going to lose a number of students to homeschooling, et cetera, et cetera. And curious if that's happening elsewhere.
People are raising hands, but I think, Mark, did you have something to say?
Yeah, we're voting on a mandate this coming Monday, and I've already received calls from a number of parents that have said, if you don't pass this, we're taking our kids out. They are absolutely insistent that there be a mandate in place, and since the state's not doing it, they want us to do it.
One of our board members responded in the discussion and said, if we'd all work together to get that 80%, then this probably wouldn't be an issue, but nobody took our offer.
Well, yeah, for us, that's not, we're elementary schools, so it doesn't apply.
Jim, go ahead.
I just wanted to say we're definitely getting parent comments, strident parent comments on both sides, is what we're seeing.
Gaston?
Yeah, so, by way of clarification, at least in my mind, removing the mask mandate is when 80% of the entire school, right, is vaccinated, and they've now defined that as the 2-shot vaccine. And so because there is no vaccine for kids under the age of 12, at least for our school, we will never meet 80% vaccination. The initial guidance that we're reviewing tonight, I think had 80% of the population that is able to be vaccinated. But I guess Dr. French changed that or clarified that to mean 80% of the whole school. So there's no way in the world we'll ever reach the 80% and be free of the mask. Over.
Thank you. Kim, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there were a lot of anti-vaxxers, anti-maskers showing up at the State Board of Ed meeting to, profess their positions. Obviously, that's not a decision for the State Board of Ed, but in that we actually are now a policy governance board, and so we are rescinding the policy that delegation of authority is inherent in policy governance. So the actual policy that we had that was delegation of authority had in it language that referred to the school year and COVID and the state of emergency. So while that was helpful, and I know a lot of us use that model language, I invite us to think about the aging of that and whether it has any effect in other districts. What our need is to sort of, I guess the delegation of authority policy was incredibly helpful in practice because our superintendent could be nimble in responding to changing guidance and changing conditions, as opposed to waiting for a board meeting to vote to approve masks or otherwise. So I don't know if there's any sort of update to people wanting to adopt a delegation of authority policy, or if you've had any thoughts on that, Sue. That model is outdated.
Right, it is outdated because it says right in it that it will terminate when the state of emergency is over. This is all quite new, so we haven't, come up with another policy to address it. I do think that there are a couple other states where it was worse sooner have done that. So it's certainly something that we could look into if we need to.
Yeah, so, sort of as I mentioned before, stay tuned for, as much guidance as VSBA can provide you coming out tomorrow. And as things develop and we get closer to the start of school, and if things start to change with the Delta variant and the views on these things might change by the administration, then, we'll certainly keep an eye on that as well too. But we're going to do our best to hopefully support all of the boards out there in this decision-making process that they're going to be presented with here in very short order. So with that, I am going to turn now to the next item on the agenda, which is a review of recommended bylaws changes. The other part of sort of doing some housekeeping stuff with the VSBA board, one is that Actually, by the bylaws, the executive committee is supposed to review the bylaws on a regular basis and then bring forward recommendations to membership for changes in those bylaws. So that is what you find included in your packet this evening. The executive committee met on at least 3 separate occasions to review the changes. And I just want to go through these with you, hopefully fairly quickly this evening. So if you want to pull up the packet and get to that section there, you might find it useful. And I will also apologize as well too. I am colorblind, and the one that I'm likely to miss is the one that's sort of lightly shaded with color. So if I skip over that and you're like, hey, Neil, whoa, you missed something, just let me know. But as I go through this, the first changes that I see are under section Article 4, which is the dues section. You'll see some language that's struck there and then some new language that's included after that. And this was based on a discussion that we had, and I can't remember whether or not it was just with the finance committee or we might have had it with the full board as well too. But as we were trying to determine whether or not we had sufficient staff at the VSBA to handle the full workload that we were encountering, and it's not just related to the pandemic, but really ongoing. One of the limitations that we discovered was that we had language in the bylaws that limited the annual percentage increase that we were allowed to go with as far as the dues assessment. And with that limitation then came an inability, at least in the near term, for us to raise sufficient funds to be able to, for example, hire additional staff to help with some of the efforts that we had going on. So working in conjunction, I believe, with members of the finance committee, we had come up with the alternate language that you see in there now, which recognizes that VSBA does indeed want to be very careful with the amount of money that we are allocating and spending to the organization, and also want to make sure that we're mindful of the education spending increases that are going on for those boards that we do support. So we tried to balance those two things and came up with the recommended language that you see here being presented in this change in Article 4, Section Dues. Essentially gives us a little bit more wiggle room to take a look at 3 years of cumulative growth in education spending rather than just the current year. Do any folks, I know this is a big one, so I just want to pause here for a second and see if any folks have any questions related to this change. All right, so I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to move on then. The next change that I see also in the due section is when dues are due, rather than saying 60 days after invoice, which means that some folks would have to calculate it on their own. We decided just to set a set date of September 1st. Scrolling down then under Board of Directors, you'll see that we've changed the organization of things a little bit. So we've changed the number of the article, as previously Article 9, now Article 7. And we're striking language in there regarding how the president is elected because it was duplicative. We've actually condensed things, included it all in one section. So you'll see that item then pop up again a little bit later on under officers and their duties. And Kim, I see you have your hand up.
Sorry, it was back on just the increase. And I think I'm just going to point out it requires no language except for the sort of acknowledgement that because we set in the budget the amount to be raised by dues and make our increase and decrease over that as ADM changes for districts, there are factors in our formula for determining dues that could, lend themselves one direction or another to a potential shift that is different than what we are building in our budget at the time we're building the budget. That's just sort of an acknowledgement. We have a quirky formula that means it's not always as linear as our percent increase in the line for individual districts when they receive their bills. That's it.
Thank you for that explanation. And I see a note here. Dave, did you actually have a question and I just missed you when we were talking about dues?
Yes, so my question was, it doesn't, plain reading of this is, to me, doesn't limit what the increase in dues will be. It could be significantly more than the 3-year average.
That is correct, yes, but I see Jim's got his hand up, so I'll go to Jim.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I was a part of the discussion on this, and I think the clear intent, one thing you have to recognize is recent history, where we did the major change in the way dues were calculated. So we essentially, ended up with sort of a flat due schedule for several years, without a real increase as we shifted to the new system, and then after that we had an increase in ed spending. So against ed spending increases of several percent each year, we didn't really have a dues increase. Then we came out of that, and the ed spending increase was like 0.46% the next year. We just realized that you really need to look at it on a multi-year basis, and if you did do something like need to add a person or a consultant or something like that, then that's going to have some impact on the budget in that particular year. So you've got to try to manage it. But I think the intent here was to keep us honest by, one, reporting every year on the multi-year increase, and recognizing that the board has to approve the budget. So if we, propose an increase in the budget that is at a level that the board feels is too aggressive, and especially in relation to ed spending, then the board and then ultimately the membership can speak on that. But we just needed the flexibility to, especially if you try to hold the line on dues for a number of years and then something happens, then and there's a need for additional services or potentially new additional resources at VSBA. It's having it strictly on each year, limited to the increase in ed spending for that year. Just that's really tying our hands. So hopefully that's helpful.
I get the 3-year rolling average seems to make a whole lot of sense. And I think what I hear you saying is, like, over the last decade, we're behind the 8 ball in terms of where we need to be with regard to dues.
Well, I think it's more over, if you look at just back 5 years, that we had, with the old formula, we would have had capacity to increase that we didn't use. And then if you need to make an increase at a later date, then, you, under the current system, there's no, makeup. And again, I think, it's really important to recognize that, the budget has to be proposed and approved. So if there's a proposal of an increase, then, if we said, okay, 4 people isn't enough and we needed 5 people at VSBA, that would be a significant change. And that would have to be discussed as a concept, but also the financial implications.
Thanks for your input.
Before I move on, any other questions related to the dues change? Okay, so I'm going to move on then. And we had noted before that we were going to strike some of the language related to how the president is elected. And if you scroll down a little bit, that's now moved into what is new number Article 8, officers and their duties. So that language is now included in that section. We just thought it was a good housekeeping thing to put all of that in the same place. Mark, go ahead.
So it might be a small thing, but in the new section 8, the last part under elections and terms of service, have crossed out that the president's elected from the active members, but you've left it in the green, yellow, whatever color that is up above. I was just wondering what the purpose of crossing it out was.
Yeah, I recall the discussion at the time was it was trying to, because if you see, and this is, I'm the victim of my own color blindness, right? We added language in there. It said active members of the board of directors. Previously, that language didn't exist. It just said among active members. And I wanted to make a clarification there that it wasn't actually active members of the VSBA, but it was active board members. So VSBA board members. Is that making sense to you? Now we could go up and sort of reconcile whether or not we need to say active board members in that first part of Article 8 and then remove it there just to make sure that the two sections are sort of in sync with one another. Kim, go ahead.
I know we looked at this a lot, the advisory or whatever, the executive committee, but I'm definitely taking your point, Mark, because that piece that we removed speaks about not just about the officers, like what happens. I don't know. I'm not sure that it might not need to exist in both places, to Mark's point. Because I put that Article 7, and it didn't strike me until you asked, Mark. Sort of identifying how a board member might become a board member. And then below, we're speaking about maybe it's unnecessary to say the second sentence down below when we're just speaking about officers. The second sentence in green. We put both sentences above and
Yeah, I mean, I would think that the transitive property would say that you're already an active board member, and you wouldn't actually need that language.
we don't need it in the top, Mark. In number 7.
Yeah, well, in number 8, the new number 8.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if the simplest change here is just to strike the word active from that highlighted sentence in the first paragraph of Article 8. So it would read, the president is elected from board members at the August meeting of each year.
Do we say VSBA board members? Active probably doesn't really mean anything.
I don't think that you need to, because the very first sentence of that paragraph says it's elected from the board of directors.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anybody that is, sorry, go ahead, Kim.
Or just put the word "it's" in there from among.
Yeah, Sue, just confirming, we have, if we wanted to entertain, like spend a little time thinking about this change, can I bring it back to the board at the September meeting? Does that give us enough time, or do we need to approve this tonight?
I'm gonna need to check the timing of that.
I think we need 30 days before the annual conference, which is November 4th. So I
Let me
believe we
check that
should.
though, Carrie.
Okay.
Make sure, because I'm not sure if it's 30 or 60.
Okay, board, let's do this in the case of time. I'm gonna, sorry, Jim, go ahead.
No, sorry. I just wanted to suggest that I think we all kind of have a meeting in the minds of what this is supposed to be. And when the executive committee went through it, we tried to make sure the language was consistent, and we tried to, get rid of repetitive. Here we have repetitive. I'm guessing, I guess the question I'd have is, does anybody really think, while this isn't as neat as it should be right now, does anybody have a question of what the actual intent and meaning is? And, could we essentially, approve it subject to, okay, the language would be cleaned up without changing the meaning?
So I just, oh, sorry. I
No,
just checked. Go ahead.
I just wanted to know if we were going to vote and be able to change it at the annual meeting again, so that we'll be triplicating this conversation. I agree with Jim. Couldn't we just move on and say we'll submit something that is better?
And I just want to make sure that I've got the time necessary to do that.
So the requirement is that we have to notify at least 30 days prior to the meeting. The other thing to consider is that I believe we have a webinar in September where we explain the resolutions, and I think the plan was to possibly explain these changes as well. And I'm not sure how the next meeting fits with the webinar. I think it might be the night before, but I'm not sure. I got to check that too.
Would the board find it acceptable? I'm talking about the bullet point elections in terms of service that are as follows. Bullet point 1, the president is elected by the board of directors from among its members, period. Is that not what we're trying to say? At its August meeting, of course, the term to be take effect on November 1st.
I'm seeing some thumbs up. Okay. So let me, I'm gonna, let's hang on to that revision, right? And I'm gonna go through the rest of the changes in this document. And then if we get to the end, if everybody's okay with everything else, including the revision, then we'll just make a motion for that. Is that okay with folks? Okay. So I'm gonna move on then. Article 9 staff, that's just a renumbering. Then in Article 10 committees of the Board of Directors, you'll see item C, Executive Committee, the last sentence, which was an addition. And that is just that the committee will recommend bylaws changes to the Board of Directors for action by the membership of the association's annual meeting. Moving on then, regional organization, since we've actually accomplished the regional reorganization, we're just going to remove the language that said effective November 2020. There was, in this next section here, there was a section in there that actually say that no person shall serve more than 5 consecutive elective years in the same office. That is with the VSBA. We're recommending that we remove that. We actually have had board members that have served longer than 5 consecutive years. I think most recently Clarence might have fell into that category, and we did not have a practice of removing people if they had hit that date. So based on what our past practice has been, we are suggesting removing that language. Moving on, then you'll see adjustments to the fiscal year, which then just removes, we are no longer in the transition period. Yay, good job, folks. So we're going to remove the language in there and then reestablish that the fiscal year is now from July 1 through June 30th. Financial reports and bonds. We spent some time on this one just to make sure that we knew what was necessary as far as bonding, and reviewed past practice, which is that since I've been on the board, I actually have not recalled that the board ever set the amount determined for bonding. We had Sue follow up with our insurance company on this one. I don't know if Sue, if you just wanted to provide a little additional explanation here. It's not that we are removing bonding, it still exists, but I'll let Sue describe.
Yeah, so we're actually making it consistent with what we currently do, because we also have the staff bonded. So we've added in and the staff into this language.
Sorry, any questions on that one, folks? All right, see. think that is, did I miss anything? I think that's all the changes then. So if folks are accepting of this, so this would be the recommendation from the VSBA board to bring to membership at the annual meeting for bylaws changes. And I think we would be looking to take a motion for this, these changes as amended this evening. If anybody would care to make said motion. Mark?
So moved.
All right, motion by Mark to accept the recommendation of the executive committee for these bylaws changes as amended this evening. Second by Nancy Russell. Any further discussion on this?
Neil, will you be able to tell me what that as amended means? Because I was looking something up, so I wasn't closely keeping track of what was being said during that time frame.
I can, Sue. So if you go back up to that section of officers and their duties.
Mm-hmm.
And then under the section where it says elections and terms of offices are as follows. The first one is modified to read: the president is elected by the board of directors from its members at its August meeting.
Okay, so we're taking out the word among and active and just say from its members.
Yep, and I think you're going to strike the language actually that we propose to add, which is of the board of directors.
Okay. And then nothing's being done to the language above that's in green?
No, that language stays.
Okay.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor with a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, then all in favor of the motion as presented? See unanimous hands. So thank you, board. A lot of housekeeping work tonight, but I think it's really going to pay off in the long run. Moving on then to the regional meetings update.
I can give that update if you would like.
That would be awesome, since I think you know more about it than I do.
Okay, so as you all know, regional meetings are coming up soon. And as we have noted in some of your past meetings, the regional meetings are going to be conducted remotely this year via Zoom. And guests are going to include the Agency of Education, probably the secretary when he can make it, and someone in his stead when he can't, on current topics such as the strategic use of the federal COVID relief funds, including possible use of the funds for school construction and school facilities needs, education recovery and operations in fall of 2021. And we also are going to be reaching out to the employer commissioners in statewide bargaining for school employees' health benefits to ask them if they would like to provide an update. They are in fact finding this week, so they are having an extremely busy and a very busy week this week. So I'm sure they're going to have a lot to report to you by September. In your packet is a list of the regional meetings and the dates and information about which regional reps terms are expiring. So if your term is expiring and you haven't already done so, if you would please let me and Carrie know if you are or are not planning to run again. That would be extremely helpful, because we hope you're planning to run again, but if you're not, we will be asking for your assistance to get the word out so that people from your region know and have the chance to run for the seat.
You could put it in the chats right now if you'd like to, if they'd be quicker.
That would be great. And Carrie, if you could could you please put the link to register for the regional meeting in the chat?
Sure.
Because that's the other thing, is that I wanted to remind all of you to please register for your regional meeting as soon as possible, so that we know who's going to be coming to the meetings. So that's the regional meeting update.
Thank you, Sue. Any questions from board members on that?
So-
Dave Sharp, go ahead.
So in general, who comes to these meetings, or who is this? Do you want all the board members from the region to to Zoom in on this meeting?
Yes, they all receive invitations to do that. Yes.
Okay.
And we would love to have all of them.
And typically you get half of them?
I would say we get a fourth of them.
Yeah, I wasn't that, but so Dave Sharp, if you can get at least half of your region's board members at the meeting, I will buy you a beer.
Okay.
I'll double that offer. So offer a second beer.
I can only handle one. Thank you though for the offer.
Yeah, so that, it's the time when your region's members get together, and certainly they have a say in then who that elected rep is going to be on the VSBA board. So would certainly encourage everybody that can attend to attend. But we do know that, historically the turnout hasn't been that great, which might be different this year because we're doing it, virtually. So, all right, with that, I am going to move on then to our next agenda topic, which is essentially to pick up on the discussion that we began at the last meeting and to get VSBA input to the task force on the implementation of the pupil weighting factors report. There are a couple of things that I want to do tonight for this agenda topic. And as I had mentioned, the first one is to continue the discussion that we began at the last meeting that was related to the use of categorical grants and a motion that was made by Mark Schauber and seconded by Gaston. We tabled that, or postponed it, I should say, to this meeting. And so now is the opportunity. I want to continue that discussion. And then I also want to draw board members' attention to VSBA actually has been requested to provide testimony at the next task force meeting, which is what's tomorrow, right, Sue?
Yes.
And we've been asked to provide testimony on a couple of very explicit topics. So I also want to have a little opportunity tonight to talk about those as well. But perhaps for starters, I want to pick up on the motion with the second discussion they're having the last meeting related to the categorical grant stuff. And I don't know if anybody is prepared and wants to jump right in. Do you guys need a little refresher as to what the motion was? It is in the packet from with the minutes from the last meeting. Anyone? If there is, so Dave Sharp, go ahead. I see your hand up.
So I plan to go to this meeting tomorrow and speak. As I was chair of the House Education Committee that commissioned this study, and I strongly believe that the weighting system it does not, as currently configured, does not serve our students, particularly students in poverty and our Black and brown students and our English language learners. I think that there's a struggle in my conversations that I've had. There's a struggle with the allocation of weighting in schools that tuition students and voucher students out of the district, that there's no way to track or envision that this money would actually go to enhance services for these populations that need the service and have not been served well by the weighting study in the past. And that's why the possibility of categorical aid has come up as an alternative. We've used categorical aid over the years in many ways to address issues in education. I'm not opposed to categorical aid, but it's tricky, whether you're talking about the weighting study or you're talking about any other way to support these students. It's tricky, and the devil's in the details. And I just want to say that to the committee. I think that what we've done over the years in Vermont is tilted the table to privatizing education. And we see that in my district right now. There was a meeting last night where Lincoln is proposing to withdraw from our school district. And I just think I think that legislators need to answer a couple of questions. One is, does the legislature believe in public education? Because if they do, I think they need to make some significant changes. And we see that in our resolutions that we passed tonight, and a recognition that the lack of oversight or the rules under which public education operates versus the lack of rules under which private education works make an unfair playing field. All this talk about, competition will solve all the problems. Well, it certainly won't solve the problems if the rules are different for the different teams in the process. So that's what basically what I plan to say tomorrow. I think it's a difficult process to go through, and there's some savvy people on that board, and they've gotten a lot of good recommendations from people throughout the state. And my hope is that they find a way to really address the issue of kids in poverty and kids of color and English language learners to actually get the services they need in order to succeed. I'm hopeful that that'll happen, but we'll have to see. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks for sharing that information with us and your plans for tomorrow. I will turn it over to Mark, but I just want to make sure. So we've got this motion on the table that was related to categorical grants. I do know that there's, the weighting study issue is a big one, and it's got other topics to it. But I want to see if at this moment in time, let's focus on the motion that's on the floor with discussion, because I want to see if we can, move this one forward for a vote if we can. So with that, Mark, go ahead.
Dave, was Dave finished?
Just could you read the motion?
Yep, I can read that. So at the last meeting, the motion was made that the VSBA would support the use of categorical aid in place of the recommended changes in pupil weights only where the study and the study's authors have indicated that such an approach would be an effective alternate way to achieve the goals of the study in terms of providing equitable educational opportunities for students. And if folks are looking for it, you will find it at the tail end of your packet in the minutes section from the last special meeting. Go ahead, Mark.
Right. So a few things. I don't think it'd be a surprise to anybody that, like Dave, I have a problem with public school dollars going to private schools. But in this case, add a change in weight isn't going to change the tuition that is being paid to these private schools. They set their tuition at whatever rate they set it at, and that is paid either at the state average, or if a district such as mine chooses to vote a rate that is higher than that, which I'm not happy about, but that's besides the point. So in this case, weight categorical aid it's not going to change how much is actually going to those private institutions. And just a reminder that in addition to poverty and ELL, the weights also include a sparsity weight and a small schools weight, which would also eliminate the small schools grant if they applied that. Just for just as an FYI, I will be testifying on this topic as well as others at the 27th, August 27th task force meeting. So I just wanted you to know that. And I'd like to read one thing from you with permission. It was written by Margaret McLean, who's actually reading it at tomorrow's task force hearing. Is that okay?
Is it relevant to the motion that's on the floor right now?
It is, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
And it's short. In discussing categorical aid, she wrote, the legislature will be hard put to come up with a more blatantly inequitable system. On its face, it is inequitable, and the details compound the inequity. The dual standard for resource distribution defies Brigham, which clearly states that children should have equitable access to resource regardless of their town of residence. Dollars that are given out by a categorical aid grant, whatever you want to call it, don't add to in the system. They are dollars that, one, we'd have to raise taxes for. One organization, which will also testify on the 27th, is going to testify that they believe we need to raise an additional $100 million in taxes in order to pay for these categorical grants, for which they are going to recommend. We don't need more taxes. This is a distribution problem, not a dollar problem. There's plenty of money in the fund. But no matter how you look at it, categorical aid will require a raise in taxes. And that's going to be a raise in taxes across the board, including those towns that are receiving the categorical aid. So I think I'll leave it at that. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to, last time around, I tried to sort of explain, my view on categorical aid versus the weighting, but I could have done a better job. Apologies. It's a complicated subject, and and the more you dig into it, the more complicated it gets. But on the issue of categorical aid versus weights, I kind of go back to what Dave Sharp said. The legislature, recognized there was an issue. They commissioned a study to be a scientific study that came up with a way to create greater equity based upon what it actually costs to educate, children in different categories. And that's what the study was. One of my real concerns with, so the study, people generally haven't argued that the study doesn't make sense or its conclusions aren't correct, but it's very painful to actually implement a change like this for a lot of districts. So it's not very popular. And my real concern on the idea of categorical aid is that basically, and Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we had a scientific study that created the weights, and the idea of, okay, the legislature will come up with a categorical aid system to try to achieve the same results of creating equity. And my concern is that's going to be based upon legislative horse trading and how the numbers come out. And so I have concern when we have something, but very difficult. And I just, rather than try to, my concern is that we not throw away the good research and the good data and the good approach to it because it's difficult and come up with something else that's going to be, when you look back, the weights that we have right now, they were put in place back in the Act 60, 68 days, and they were just kind of pulled out of a hat. And I'm not sure that, a categorical aid system put together by, a group of legislators is going to be a lot more accurate in terms of providing equity to our kids than even our current system. But we have a good piece of work through the study, and I think just a lot more effort on how to implement that in a way that everybody can live with, instead of trying to replace it with something else, is a more rational approach. So that's in a long nutshell.
Thanks, Jim. Before I go back to Mark, though, is there anybody else that hasn't spoken to the motion yet that would like to say anything? Not seeing anything. Mark, go ahead.
I just want to say that there's nothing in this motion that precludes the legislature from using grants or categorical aid to supplant the taxing capacity that would be lost by districts that are currently overweight. What we're saying is that categorical aid should not be used in place of the 4 categories that were researched: the ELL, small schools, sparsity, and poverty. And just one more thing, which is tangentially relevant, and something that Jim said. At the last task force meeting, Tammy Colby testified that the current weights were holdovers from the foundation formula pre-Act 60, and that under the foundation formula, the weights mean something very different than they mean in our current formula. So what should have been done with Act 60 was weights should have been recalculated based on the new formula. That was never done. So that's why we're seeing the wide range, specifically in the poverty, in weights. That's more of an explanation than anything.
Thanks, Mark. Dave Sharp, go ahead.
Thanks. This is a great discussion. So when we were discussing this bill, debating this bill on the floor, whether to have this study or not, one of the other legislators came up to me with a book and showed me where weighting had been put in place in 1906 in Vermont. So weighting students is not a new thing. And we actually did change weights, I'd say 3, maybe 4 times from 2000 to the present. So that there has been tinkering with weights since Act 60. And yet we still have great disparity. What has happened traditionally in Vermont, whether it's a foundation formula or the formula before that Don probably remembers the name of, but I don't, and Act 60 and Act 68, each of those formulas and changes in school funding, money was added to the pot because, strictly speaking, if money had not been added to the pot, there would be winners and losers. And it's hard to get legislators to vote for a package that their community is going to lose on. So the strategy in the legislature for each change that I'm aware of in school funding has been an infusion of money so that there are few losers, and the most everybody is a winner. The ones we're trying to help are bigger winners than the ones we're not trying to help. So that's one of the problems. We don't necessarily have a chunk of money to add to this. And if we just did the weighting, there would be winners and losers, and the losers are not going to vote for the new weights in the legislature. So they have to figure out, this committee has to figure out a way to either add money to the pot or create a situation where there are few enough losers so that the package will pass through the legislature. It's why these weights didn't change 3 years ago when the weighting study came out. Oh, sure, clear, it's the right thing to do. The science is there, the logic is there, change the weights. But if that had been done and immediately without any infusion of money, it would have lost on the floor of the House. So now they're struggling with a way to find a glide path into having these new weights. And it's not an easy job.
Thanks, Dave. Don, go ahead.
Well said, Dave. I lived under 6 different formulas, and I think the best one I can remember happening was late Richard Snelling, and he came up with a substantial amount of money to move it in the direction he wanted to do it. But I will say, when it comes to winners and losers, that my tenure in education showed that when the formula changed, quite often areas who lost until we got to Act 68. So he's right on. It's going to take money unless we have a different legislature now than we've had in the last 60 years.
Thank you, Don. So I am trying to see if I can move us forward to taking a vote on the motion. Mark, go ahead.
So I just want everyone to remember that if you want to talk about winners and losers, according to JFO's most recent report, 65% of our districts are underweight. And those that are overweight have been overweight for 20 plus years and have had the ability to build infrastructure, build up surpluses. Was having a discussion with our business manager yesterday, who was talking to another business manager of a SU that is quite wealthy, and she was told they have a $10 million surplus. So there's money in the system to live with the reduction in taxing capacity. If you add money to the system, to the ed fund, you won't have equity. And the whole purpose of this, and Dave, you can clearly talk to this much better than I can, whole purpose of putting that in Act 173 was to bring equity to the system. So equity requires a balance. And if you are just going to keep weighting one system more, you're not going to actually have equity. So that's it.
Thank you. Kim, go ahead.
I guess I'm wondering, because this is something I don't know, is the consideration that the categorical aid might be a tool for the transition? I guess one of the things in listening to Dave Sharp is in the concern with this motion is that it sounds like all tools will be necessary to fix this and to fix it with the integrity of the study. So I believe that they've been talking about changing weights since probably, I don't know, since any of us have been serving on boards, because the weights have been wrong and everybody's known it. And I think that, to Dave's point, you know better than anybody that, you know, what will and won't happen in the legislature. I think this needs to be resolved with the integrity of that study, but to have them also have the authority to go changing the funding formula or otherwise, I don't know what the answer is to creating the transition that doesn't harm kids and anywhere, that ensures that these additional tasking capacities are directed towards improving opportunities for students. I don't know that answer, and I don't know, I am concerned about us taking a hard line that prevents whatever tools might resolve the appropriate weights being implemented and considered, since it's so integral to our funding formula.
I don't, so I don't, I guess I'm
I
not
don't
sure
know
that we,
I don't know if that question is something anybody knows. I guess it was a question to whoever might have insight on that.
yeah, and I wonder if the answer is, so, you know, as I go back and I reflect on the motion that was made, right? You know, I think, you know, if we look at it, it was that the VSBA would support the use of categorical aid in place of the recommended pupil weights only where the study and the study's authors have indicated such an approach would be an effective alternate way to achieve the goals of the study. And so, you know, maybe going back to the point that Jim had made previously, and I think that Mark had hinted on as well too, is not talking about the fact that the VSBA opposes the use of categorical aid in any circumstance, just where it relates to the weighting factors in the study. That would sort of be where we draw the line. I'm not sure if that's helpful, but I will turn it over to Dave because I see he's got his hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we might wordsmith that motion a little bit, but basically I support the motion that we want. I think the gist of it is that we want this committee to adhere to the principles set forth in the study. And if using and only using categorical aid when it furthers the principles put forward in the study, like transit or as a piece of a bigger picture where the weights are changing for a long term, and the categorical aid maybe is used as a short term thing. I'm not sure exactly how to wordsmith it, but you know, that's the gist I got out of the motion, was that basically we want to adhere to the ideas in the study and only use categorical aid in aiding that effort.
Thanks, Dave. Mark, go ahead.
So the intent of the motion is to tell this task force that that the weights are what they need to implement. That doesn't say that they can't use categorical aid to relieve some of the stress or pain of getting to the full implementation of those weights. Now, we fully expect that this is going to take, you know, hopefully not more than 3, but, you know, about 3 years for them to actually implement the weights fully. So I don't see this motion as saying don't use categorical aid. It's saying don't use it in place of the recommendations of the weighting study. And just to answer your question, Kim, the committee is the task force is essentially looking at possibly using categorical aid as a replacement for the ELL weight. And the reason for that is that at one of the, I believe it was one of the sessions in front of the House Ed, or maybe, no, actually, I think it was Ways and Means, Tammy Colby had kind of opened the door to that. And she had said that that was the only weight that from a mathematical scientific perspective that a weight could replace it. So that's really what they're looking at doing, possibly doing.
Yep. And for board members' benefit, I pasted the motion from the last meeting into the chat, so you actually can actually look at it if that's helpful at all. Kim, go ahead.
Why, I'm just wondering if there was some other history, like why is ELL replaceable, but other weights aren't?
I could provide a little, oh,
okay.
sorry, Mark.
I just had a call into Tammy to talk about that very question.
I took some pretty detailed notes during the last task force meeting that Tammy spoke to that a little bit. So I have those notes. I believe I could tell you what they say. Would that be helpful?
I think it would, yeah. So if you could take a moment and do that.
Okay, let me find them. It will only take me a moment.
Neil, this is Don, and I keep getting a message that my connection is unstable. So if I disappear, it's because I have disappeared like 4 times. I go offline. So it's not intentional, but it's beyond my control.
Understood. But thanks for letting us know. I appreciate it.
Okay, this is what I have from my notes that Professor Colby testified to the task force. First, she said that simply adding more money to the system by using categorical grants may bring up the floor, but it doesn't do anything to affect the spending at the top. Categorical grants add money to the system and no governor at the top. Average spending and tax rates will go up. And then she said, categorical aid program is a program that provides dollars for specific or targeted purposes or groups of individuals or jurisdictions. It's specific and targeted, not part of general operating support. It can be provided as a total or lump sum or per capita. When is it appropriate to use categorical aid versus other policy mechanisms to adjust for cost differences? She had a brief graphic on page 2 of her testimony about that. And she said, when the goal is to equalize costs generally across districts and schools for the purpose of equalizing spending and tax efforts and opportunities to learn, we think about cost adjustments embedded in a general ed funding formula. When providing specific and targeted support for specific students, we think about categorical grants. The time to use categorical grants is when there is an identified cost differential and that can be measured reliably. And she said that categorical grants may have additional accountability. Concerns with categorical grants, they're difficult to establish appropriate funding levels, vulnerable to political manipulation, and if put a dollar amount in the statute, you have to update it. They may create program silos and be difficult to blend and braid different funds. May increase average per pupil spending levels in Vermont. Adding money into the system creates administrative burden and cost for state districts and schools. When you have multiple categorical programs operating at the same time, it is highly inefficient and poorly adjusts cost differentials.
Thank you for that, Sue.
Is that, can I just make sure others heard it the way I heard it? So she used that as an example because there might be other measures that are already objectively associated with ELL. But then if that were to come out of this formula, which doesn't grow the number of bodies, but it redistributes the number of equalized pupils, but redistributes the equalized pupils, how does it work if you just pull out one category? What about students who meet more than one criteria?
Mark, go ahead.
They'd still be counted in whatever that particular category is. So you wouldn't be pulling the student out, you'd be pulling the weight out for that student in that one category. I hope that helps.
Colleen, you got your hand up?
Yeah, one of the objections to categorical aid could be related to having to label children. For example, if we think of special education and different dollars go depending on the different condition that a kid is labeled with. And we know that in our state, we decided to move to block grants based on the just the total population of a school district, for example, rather than the categorical divisions of learning disabilities or whatever it might be. So as Dave said in the beginning, it sounds good on paper, categorical aid, but sometimes it's the devil in the detail, and just creates more. And I think Tammy Coley said this in one of her reports. The downside is it creates silos. And so, I think probably we all want the same thing. We want money distributed to ensure that all kids have access. And we know that poverty is a big issue, and sometimes poverty goes with other labels that kids have, such as ELL or whatever it might be. So I was in favor of postponing this motion at the last meeting, but it was more of my objection to voting the last time was more procedural and not having enough information at the time. But I think the motion as it sits, I could support it, because it's not taking a stand on one version or another. It's just saying, let's go back to the report. Let's go back to the experts and see what they suggest. And I might have missed some of the conversation. So thank you.
No, Colleen, thanks for that. And I actually don't, I think your assessment is accurate. I guess if I'm sort of judging the temperature around the Zoom room here, I'm not sensing a huge opposition necessarily to the motion that's on the table. I do know that Dave Sharp indicated that maybe some language tweaking, but even with some of the discussion that I've heard back and forth, I'm not convinced maybe that the language in the existing motion is that far removed from even some of the points that Dave Sharp was making. I'd like to see if we, unless there's huge opposition to this, I would be willing, if someone wanted to, be ready to call the question on this one.
I'll call the question. I'm okay with it the way it is.
Okay. Jim, go ahead.
Just seconding.
Okay. Sue, can you help me out here? I think I need a 2/3 vote in order to end discussion on this. Am I correct?
I think you just need a majority vote,
Okay.
but you'll probably get more than 2/3 anyway.
But the motion would be then to call the question. So bring the motion to a vote, and I take the vote for that first and then the vote on the motion.
Yes.
Okay. So we've got a motion on the floor to call the question to end debate, call the question, seconded by, sorry, was that Mark that seconded or Jim that seconded it? Jim that seconded it. Okay. All those in favor on the motion to call the question, please raise your hand so I can see it. All right, that is unanimous. All right, so then we've got the motion on the table, and that is the VSBA would support the use of categorical aid in place of the recommended changes in pupil weights only where the study and the study's authors have indicated that such an approach would be an effective alternate way to achieve the goals of the study in terms of providing equitable educational opportunities for students. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand and keep them up so I can get a count. All right, that is unanimous. So the motion passes. Thank you, board. So at this point then, I want to turn it over to Sue so that we can talk a little bit about, we did receive a request from the chair or the co-chairs of the task force for the VSBA to weigh in on some specific items related to the weighting study. And I wonder, Sue, can you maybe cover those items for us?
Yes, so they reached out to me for testimony. I will be testifying tomorrow on education quality standards, the poverty weight and ELL. And I'll go back to that in a minute, but also just wanted to let you know that they also asked if I would testify again on August 27th, I believe it is. Yes. And possible topics on that day are tuitioning, excess spending threshold, rurality, hold harmless provision in ADM, and homestead tax rate. So, oops, what I want to do is go back to this other document here. I've started to prepare my testimony, but I needed, information from this board meeting tonight to finish doing that. I have your motion that you just passed, which I will include along with the other two motions that you have passed regarding the weighting study. And then specifically, I just wanted to let you know some of the specific things that they were looking for as far as the 3 areas that they wanted me to talk about tomorrow. Under education quality standards, there are a few task force members that are asking, what are we spending this money on, and asserting that maybe there should not be any tweaks unless they know how it's going to be spent. And the education quality standards and somehow tying it to that has been put forth as a possible remedy. And so the question was, what would it like to use them as a mechanism if they were going to do that? I think that's more of a question for the Agency of Education. But there are some, if there's input that you would like to give me regarding my testimony on the education quality standards, that would be helpful. Trying to think what else I can tell you. I can tell you that the purpose of the education quality standards is to ensure that all students in Vermont public schools are afforded educational opportunities that are substantially equal in quality and enable them to achieve or exceed the standards approved by the State Board of Education. They cover things like curriculum and instruction, personalized learning plans, graduation requirements, teacher qualifications. I'm not listing everything in them. I'm just giving you sort of a few things that are in there. Instructional materials, school facilities and the learning environment. And AOE is supposed to conduct a review of all Vermont schools and determine whether students in each public school are provided educational opportunities that are substantially equal to those provided in other public schools. And if it determines that those standards aren't being met, it recommends actions to the district that the district has to take. If the district does not make sufficient progress, then recommendations go to the state board. That's all in current law. So that is what the educational quality standards cover. That's what they are. If you have any input for me as far as the task force goes, happy to receive that. And do you want me to go through the other two, or do you want to stop on each one and discuss separately, Neil?
I guess these things can get rather complex. So why don't we pause
Yeah.
there for a moment?
Okay.
And Dave Sharp, you have your hand up.
Thank you. So I think this is a reasonably good process. The problem is that it only applies to public schools. So I spoke earlier about this tendency to put scrutiny and regulation and rules and process on public education where private education goes scot-free. So this ought to just apply to all schools, public or otherwise.
Thanks, Dave. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, my issue is slightly different, that, our education quality standards are intended, that's a a very broad and long-term way of trying to ensure that we have quality for our kids. And I think the legislature here is looking for a short-term exact measurement of what what is being achieved by X, or that, what are the results? And honestly, I just don't, quality standards, I don't think are that type of measure, and I don't think we have a measure available to us that can really answer those questions. So, I think, my impression is that the, much of legislators are looking for a way to test whether, how this works out. And I think the simple answer is, education quality standards are long-term. That's not going to do it for you, but, we can over time try to observe and come up with a way to do it, but we don't have that mechanism right now.
Thank you, Jim. Anybody else have any comments or any thoughts as to whether or not we want to, the one thing I think is that I've heard Dave Sharp's comments, and I don't know if it's appropriate to actually craft those in the form of a motion from this board that might provide Sue then with some additional guidance and testimony for tomorrow. Mark, go ahead.
Well, actually, for Don, can you mute your smoke detector that's beeping in the background is terrifying my dog. Curled up around my foot right now. As far as quality standards go, I think it's important that they be applied evenly across the board. Now, while I agree they should be applied to private schools, I don't think that that's what they're going to be looking at. But by what I mean by that is that they need to be applied to the quote unquote overweight and underweight districts. That this can't be a let's target something to the currently underweight districts because they're going to be getting more taxing capacity than what we're applying to all other districts. So that's, I think, my only comment.
Thank you, Mark. Sue, I'm going with the assumption that it might be beneficial if this body gave you maybe a little bit of guidance on this topic for tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it would. I've been taking notes on what individual members have been saying, but I'm not sure what the whole body's guidance to me is. So that would be great.
Yep. So board members, I mean, absence an official motion from this group to give Sue some guidance, she could relay the varying opinions of this body, but say that those are just, individual opinions and not necessarily a position of the VSBA board. But to the extent that this group thinks that it might be helpful to provide something a little bit more formal, we can do that tonight in the form of a motion. Dave Sharp, go ahead.
I'll make an attempt at a motion that we support the even-handed application or use of the educational quality standards across the board in Vermont, including private schools. Well, no, let me change that. Including all schools where public tax dollars are educating our students.
Okay, one of the things that I find in cases like this is that if you think that you could actually type that and put it into the chat, it's super beneficial for then other board members to see something concrete that they can then respond to.
I'll give it a try.
I think I just typed it out. Let me put it in there and see if it's okay.
Okay. Awesome, Carrie, the woman behind the screen who's secretly running the show here. Board members, I will also check in with you guys. I knew that tonight's meeting was going to run long. We are currently at about 10 minutes to 8. Are there board members that have a hard stop this evening? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I'm going to do my best to keep the discussion moving along, but this is a pretty, no pun intended, weighty topic. So I want to make sure that we devote the time necessary to it. All right, Carrie, our hero, according to Amy McMullen. There, I believe, is the transcription of what Dave Sharp provided. Dave, if you take a look at that, do you think that it represents the motion that you made? I get a thumbs up from Dave. All right, I am going to say that we have a motion then on the table. I would look to see if there is a second. Yeah, Adrian, is that a second? Okay, so second from Adrian. Now we have some discussion. Mark, go ahead.
So I do intend to vote in favor of this motion, but I do want to say that I would prefer that the AOE take up quality assurance independent of the weights. No, I understand the politics behind this and that's not going to happen. So Dave, I appreciate the motion you made, and I think it's a good one. So I just wanted to get that out on the record.
Thank you, Mark. Kim, go ahead.
I really like the simplicity of the motion, and I would imagine improvement for everyone if there was something as simple as all of us affirming our adherence. And I guess we're supposed to be doing it in our the continuous improvement plans, but there feels like there's little occasion where we're either checking something off to get our funding, whether that's in our current system or in a restructured system with more appropriate weights. And certainly it's not happening with our independent schools. So I really like the motion. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Kim. Any further discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none then, all of those in favor of the motion as it stands, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. All right, Sue, if we want to pop on to the other items that we were asked to testify on.
Yes, so the second one was the poverty weight, and it was and there was quite a discussion at the last task force meeting about how to measure poverty. There was some testimony from Hunger Free Vermont about moving to one statewide form. And the question was that they wanted the feedback from superintendents and school boards to get their input on the possibility of a form. The form is already being, used by districts that have universal meals. So Winooski uses it, Burlington, and I think Wyndham Southeast uses it. And I should give you a little bit more information because this really sets the scene for the conversation. I was really interested to hear testimony from DCF that the poverty counts in Vermont, which DCF provides twice annually to AOE, and it's families receiving nutrition benefits, which is 3 Squares Vermont. Only 64% of eligible families are enrolled. So it's a pretty significant undercounting of poverty by using that measure. And the testimony was that there are children experiencing deep poverty in Vermont who are not reflected in those numbers that DCF is able to provide. And so that's why the task force is looking at moving to a form that every family would be required to complete, so that that form would be the basis for the poverty weights, rather than relying on families to apply for benefits, DCF to compile that information, DCF to send the information to the Agency of Education. It's a pretty long process. And the other thing I wanted to say before all of you started talking about this was that one of the things that I have noticed and heard from school board members is that it's can be difficult when the agency is supposed to provide the equalized pupils by December, and they're still changing the number throughout the spring, and sometimes in May, districts don't have them yet. So it may be that some kind of more certain process will help in that, because my impression is that the poverty weight is the one that is often changing a lot during that uncertain time period between December and May. So if any of you have information on that, I think Dave Sharp may have some information on that. That would be helpful for me.
Thank you, Sue. Gaston.
Yeah, thank you. So for our school district in Troy, the community actually voted to provide free meals to all students. That would be breakfast and lunch, as well as snacks. As I understand it, Sue, the issue is not so much the form. It's getting families to complete the form. So I ask you, with a new form in hand, what is the notion that people would prefer to fill that form out when they're not filling out this other form? It's sort of, you know, right? I mean, it gets to encouraging people to fill these forms out to benefit them and their kids, but at the same time, they're not actively filling them out. Does that make sense, Sue?
Yeah, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head, Gaston. And they're trying to, there were 4 different forms that were submitted as examples. And I think what they're trying to do is try to figure out what would be the most user-friendly thing that people would fill out. And how can you get them all to do it? So that's what they kind of wanted to hear from superintendents and school boards about. I don't know if you have, if any of you are in districts that you have any useful information about that.
Mark, go ahead.
So I think an important part of the conversation is that the federal government precludes states from requiring the free and reduced lunch form to be filled out. So you can't require that of your families. They don't preclude, and I forget what they called that, this other form, but they don't preclude the state from requiring that form. So the state could come in and say, here's a form that is required, and it's just part of your entrance package every year for every student. So that's how you get around the difficulty of getting families to fill out the form.
Adrian, go ahead.
I guess I have a question on what the other forms are asking. We already get a lot of pushback from people trying to keep their family business confidential. How much information, financial information, would the state be gathering from students that is now in the hands of local people? We had terrible trouble trying to find financial information in our private preschool because families just, you know, there was no reason for them to give it out, even if we required it. And they just wouldn't do it. They were terribly affronted by being asked those questions.
It's a lot of financial information.
I don't see how you could get every family to, I mean, why don't we just ask everybody to give their tax return? I mean, that would be easier, or free up that information for the feds. I mean, it's just to put this all on the onus of families and you know, giving their private information to their local school it's just not gonna happen.
Sure.
Yeah, so I don't have any really good answers. I believe what they did at the Essex High School when I was teaching up there was the cafeteria moved to having all payment of lunches by everybody with a fingerprint thing. So in order to register your fingerprint, you had to fill out a form. And so you were asking every student to fill out a form that allowed the school to get a much more accurate count. Now, I didn't work in the cafeteria, and this was just what kids were telling me in the classroom. But it would be worth asking Essex High School if that in fact was the case, and how successful were they with it, and what. So there must be some school districts that are doing a pretty good job of this, and finding out how they're doing it would be helpful.
Mark, do you have your hand up again, or is that from before? Go ahead.
Yeah. So Adrian, the issue you brought up is one of the reasons that myself and the coalition have been arguing that a change in how poverty is counted should not be part of this task force. It's a huge, complicated topic that could easily take a year to resolve. Yeah, I mean, that's where I stand on it. Right now we have, while we may be getting incorrect counts, we're getting incorrect counts across the board. So there's, in a sense, equity in the incorrectness of them.
Thanks, Mark. Kim, go ahead.
Was there not an assumption for how in the study for how they determined poverty? Wasn't it FRL? So if that changes, does that change the integrity of the study and the science otherwise, and the balance that they would assess and the weights they would assess to it? Again, I'm just going back to the very theoretical. If you start changing variables, isn't it going to impact the integrity of the study and the outcomes that were found? And how does that get reconciled without it being this spiral of chasing one's tail to get to some place of stability to do something? I would somewhat agree that I don't know if it can all be done at once. I would also say that we're a couple years, we're going into our second year, and we definitely saw a drop off in Essex Westford in applications. I think there's something to be said for, we have talked, our COO and superintendent and, chair and vice chair, we've talked about, can we require, if the state told us we could require something from everybody, we'd like to, because we feel as though there are other benefits that things like we pay AP test fees if you are eligible for free lunch. And, there are other things that make it important even when lunch is free. And we very much so support free lunch for all, but had they not extended it, we weren't sure how that would happen within the constraints of our, budget and the number of kids we would be trying to do that for without the federal support if the program had ended. So we're really excited that it extended, and I hope in the time that passes in this year, they figure out how to get the information they would have otherwise been getting via a form. That we know we don't have fewer kids in poverty in high school, we just have fewer kids in poverty without a form. So, I don't know, can you guys not hear me anymore? My ears are dying.
Well, you had we
Sorry, it
thought
sounded
you,
like my
we had you until the
died
very end there,
completely.
Kim. All right. Let me so with that, I'm gonna kind of.
Sorry.
That's okay. I think we got most of what you were saying. So I know Mark's got his hand up, but I just want to turn to Sue. I mean, it's my understanding, right, that at the very least, the simulations that were provided at the end of the weighting study were based on poverty data that was gathered through the free and reduced lunch metric, wasn't it?
The way that the AOE counts it now is not through free and reduced lunch.
Oh,
It's
that's
through the
through-
information they get from the Department of Children and Families, 3 squares.
Sorry, my bad. Yes, you were right.
But there is a section of the study that talks about the most effective measurements that but it doesn't look at one household form. It looks at free and reduced lunch and other measurements. I think it finds at the school level, the most effective measurement is the federal count for free and reduced lunch, not the school count. And then at the district level, it found that the information collected by the AOE from DCF, the 3 squares, was the most correlated number.
Okay.
But again, it didn't consider this a different way of doing it.
Right. And can you help me out there? Is the reason that the task force is looking at this?
The reason they're looking at it is because they don't think that the poverty measurement is currently accurately measuring poverty. And one thing that that Mark said I wanted to comment on, because he said, well, if it's not accurate, it's not accurate across the board. But I think what I heard, I'm pretty sure I took some notes on this, was that it's sort of regional differences. Like in Rutland, it was 92% that were eligible had applied, but in some other part of the state, it was 54%. Or so it can depend on what region you're in as far as how accurate it is. It is, I think, what I heard.
Okay, Mark, go ahead.
So Sue, I think what the numbers you were just referring to were free and reduced lunch, because you don't apply to DCF. So I think a lot of DCF's work is actually on the ground, determining, and the federal number that the report says was more valid, and I don't remember, might have been at school level. It's a census number, which is still extremely inaccurate because it's based purely on regression studies. Yeah, and what I was going to say was that the researchers had originally used free and reduced lunch as their metric until they started collaborating with, I don't remember if it was JFO or AOE, and determined that that it was the DCF number that was used, which is why there's a fair amount of information in the report on free and reduced lunch. I'm not a statistician by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I have a really hard time understanding that, but there's a lot of good information in that report. If you need something to help you fall asleep at night, it's worth reading that section.
Thanks, Mark. And maybe Sue or others can help me. I seem to recall, though, some concern, and it might have been during the last legislative session, that the actual numbers that folks were getting through Brad James from AOE related to poverty, they had questions about, because it didn't seem to accurately reflect what they were experiencing in their own towns and districts. And I guess if that's the case, then part of me would be cautious about this body suggesting that it not change, right? Am I remembering accurately what happened during this last legislative session?
Yes, there were districts that were very concerned that those counts were not accurate. I think that they were looking at their free and reduced lunch numbers and comparing them to which don't, as we've discussed, don't go into that calculation. And finding that they weren't matching up.
Yeah, so while I could certainly appreciate what you were saying before, Mark, about if it's wrong, then it's wrong for everybody. I guess I don't feel too terribly confident, though, that that's actually what's happening on the ground. And listening to some of the conversation around the table here tonight, at least at the moment, all right, I'm not getting a great sense that we're collectively at sort of all of the same opinion on this one. But I'm willing to be persuaded, but I see Adrian has her hand up.
I just did a quick search. Three squares is all of the essential, like, I mean, what you or I grew up in, considering help from the government, welfare or whatever. You do have to apply to Department of Children and Families. There's a very specific form. It's based on poverty guidelines, the federal guidelines. And they probably do have a better number because most poor families can't survive, at least without food stamps of some sort. So that was all I found out.
Thank you. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just suggest that probably what we can agree on is that how the poverty, how poverty is calculated and how it's included in the weights is an important issue. To go with Kim's point, the report now, the weights are based upon a particular measure, and so you'd have to pay attention to that fact that the weights that have been produced reflect a particular measure, and if you just switch measures, then that's creating a real problem with the quality of the study. But this is an important issue, as Mark said. It actually is to come to to fully get your arms around this is a long-term solution. That should be a goal, is to get to a good poverty weight that's consistent with the weights and all. But at the same time, so that should be a goal. But this task force is probably not going to be able to answer this question. So I think it's a very important question, and it needs some work. I think we'd all agree on that, but at the same time, it's probably not a short-term answer. May not be achievable, but it's something that, let's say you put the weights in place over a 3-year period. You would spend a lot of time over the next whatever period of time trying to come up with the right answers for this question.
Thanks. Mark, go ahead.
So just relatively quickly, the regression studies that were done by the researchers can be redone with whatever poverty numbers the task force or legislature chooses to use. The relative changes in the weights is not going to change a whole lot. So as Jim was saying, they can change the weights based on new calculations at any time. So I don't think that they should be holding off because this is a complicated topic. 2 other things. One, Neil, when the legislature first kind of started talking about this undercounting of the number of people in poverty, it was coming from the then overweight districts who were concerned that they weren't going to get their quote unquote fair share. It's just for context, that's where it started. And I forgot the last thing I wanted to say, so never mind.
Okay. One of the things that I think, and Sue, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the sort of the impetus behind the request for this testimony was trying to, I think, maybe get a sense from school boards as to what the right measurement ought to be in terms of what school boards thought might get a better response rate maybe, or have a greater accuracy of information coming in there. And if that maybe is one of the premises behind the question, I'm not getting a huge sense from this body right here that we necessarily have an opinion on that matter. Is anybody here in disagreement with that statement? And then Kim, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I don't think this is in disagreement with that statement, but I think maybe taking a page from Dave Sharp's book, maybe it's as simple as indicating a value in finding, for a lot of reasons, actually when we go back to free meals by those that are designated as eligible, simplifying a form that becomes part of a package that all people complete. I think I don't think the worry is that we're going to over-identify those in poverty. It isn't for me. My worry is that we see a huge drop-off in students and families completing forms in high school. And we know we don't have a huge drop-off in families in poverty in high school. So I guess if there is a general sentiment that is supportive of a different way of thinking about gathering information that more accurately reflects those students in poverty and eligible for services, whether that's free lunch or identification for the weights, that feels like something that might have universal support. And I don't know if that's a meaningful statement at all, Sue. Or if anybody else agrees with me. It was just I was looking at these sample forms. I was thinking, there's got to be a better way. We know the way we have is bad.
Yeah. So Kim, I think related to that, if there was any sort of, if I was trying to get a sense if there was some agreement among this body here related to this topic, I'm going to read you my thoughts. This is not a motion. This is not a motion. This is where I think if there was agreement, it may be around this item, and that is that the VSBA supports efforts to improve the collection of data related to poverty so that it is more accurate and timely. I'm not entirely sure if that that's the sense I was getting from this.
I'll second it.
All right, for Carrie's benefit, I actually had that written down, so I'm just going to paste it in.
Thank you. You're awesome. I need to probably know the motions again because they went so quickly. I didn't write them down.
Who made the motion?
Kim made the motion.
And Jim seconded?
I believe he did.
And on the discussion end, I think it's still important to note that while, this, I think we're all going to agree with Neil's, what Neil put out there. The question is then, what impact should that have on the task force's work? And, I think that, they have to recognize this as an issue. At the same time, they can't use it as let's commission another study and we'll get back to this in 5 years.
I understand your concerns, Jim, and I think the more that we talk about this, this is a pretty broad topic, and we've been asked to opine on so many different pieces of this. It's clear to me tonight that if we continue in this manner of having to address each individual item of this weighting study, like this body here we're going to end up spending a lot of time together, folks, over the next, several weeks and months. I'm not, I don't know if that's our best approach here. I'm willing to continue with it for the remainder of this evening, though, since we have a couple of other things that we want to make sure that we get through. But I think it's something that we're going to need to reflect on and see if we're approaching this the right way. That being said, we do have a motion on the floor. It has been seconded. I'll look to see if there's any further discussion on it. Mark, go ahead.
So while I completely agree with the sentiment of the motion, I can't support it because it's not telling the task force to, well, to do what their name is, which is to figure out a way to implement the recommendations of the task force. So I think it's important to figure out the poverty count issue, but that I don't believe that that should be on the table for this task force.
Thank you for that, Mark. Any other discussion on the motion?
I would just offer that my brilliant motion as crafted by Neil was, I think, if that is possibly a way forward, and I think we could change the form in our district individually. We could do it all individually, or we could make a suggestion to say the study was based on, free and reduced lunch. We're recognizing free and reduced lunch is inaccurate. So stop focusing on whether or not that's the right measure. And here's a way to possibly fix, for many good purposes, the accuracy of the measure. So to me, it doesn't seem like it slows the process in any way. It just offers a tool, a suggestion for an improvement in the tool that would be beneficial for so many reasons. So that's just zooming out from that motion for a second.
Thanks, Kim. And Jim, I know Dave had his hand up first, so I'm going to go to Dave first and then back to you.
Thanks. This is important to our district. So the initial report from the Joint Fiscal Office used the DCF data, DCA, whatever it is, and our poverty rate was pegged at 11.7%. The school's data says that there's around 38% poverty rate in our school, and that's a huge change. And if they put the DCF numbers in the bill, that's going to be really bad for our district. And it's important to us that they count students more accurately. So I'm going to support the motion.
Thanks. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of note that I think all of us, as a part of the discussion, have to keep in mind that the legislature had a whole, big head of steam behind the idea of universal free meals before last year too. And that's going to come back, and that's likely to have, if that continues to get support, that's going to have a potentially very large impact on this whole question. So, the legislature asking us what's the right answer. Well, part of that, we probably can't answer that, but also you guys through your actions may be impacting what the right answer is. So, it's hard for us to give a direction when you keep moving the goalposts.
Thanks for that. Nancy, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of things that, because I've been really following this task force and because I was very involved in it with our local community because of the poverty rates, but different organizations, different task force, different state governments, different federal governments are using different ways to figure out what those poverty rates are. And sometimes that gets very confusing because the feds are using one formula to figure out their rate, and our local people are using a different formula to figure out their rate. So there's a lot of disparity there, I think, when we're looking at poverty rates as to what is the real poverty rate for the community. And second, something was said at the last task force meeting that, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten which representative said it, was the fact that some of the stuff that we think, we like our state board here is thinking that the task force should be charged with is not something that that particular task force was charged with to take care of. And so I guess in my mind, I'm a little I'm a little concerned about what we're saying to them now about the poverty rate for those two reasons, because there's, again, the poverty rate's being determined by a number of different ways. And again, that this is maybe not part of the actual charge that this task force has. Anyway, just two thoughts that popped into my head. Sorry.
Thanks. I am pretty interested in moving forward on a vote for this. So let's be thinking about that, folks. Mark, go ahead.
As much as I hate to say it, the legislature gave a really broad charge to this task force.
Yeah.
They can do pretty much anything that they want, which is why it's my job to get them to narrow their focus.
All right. If there isn't any further discussion, I do want to take a vote on this motion. All those in favor of the motion as it stands, please raise your hand. And those opposed. Okay, so Carrie, is everyone in support except for Mark Schauber opposed? So that
So
motion,
passed by majority? Is that how you want to put it?
you can, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Sue, was there one other topic that they were looking for input on?
So the other topic was English language learners. And it had to do with categorical grants. So I think your previous motion covers that. The only other question under that one was, and this, I don't know that you need to spend a whole bunch of time on this. What do we think about the current calculation for poverty that includes English language learners not living in poverty? So the poverty calculation also includes English language learners not living in poverty. And no one really knows why that's in there, according to what people testified to on July 29th. So I don't know if you, it doesn't seem like a huge point that we need to weigh in on, but they did specifically ask me that to provide information about that. So if there's anything that you, if it's something that you want to cover, you certainly could. And if you don't, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we've got the motion that we just passed. We've got the motion related to the use of categorical grants. Is there anyone here, though? I see Colleen has her hand up. I'll go to that, but I think my question would be if there anyone has specific information as to maybe if they know why that is in there right now and why it ought to be either removed or stay. That would be, great information to have, but I'm not sure that we have that. Colleen, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Sue and Neil, you both said, we have already covered it, and I would agree. And some of the questions that are coming to the VSBA, it seems to me that it should go to the superintendents. School board members are lay people who try to bring their best thinking to education policy, but we are not experts in English language learner instruction or needs of the students or assessments or anything. So I agree that we've already covered the discussion through the categorical discussion and making a request to have efforts, however broadly it's stated, related to poverty, calculating poverty in more accurate ways. But, as a school board member, even though I spend a lot of time working with educators, it's not my area of expertise. So I think it's a question for superintendents.
Thanks for that. Any other thoughts on the matter? Otherwise, I'm willing to charge Sue with just going forward with the existing motions that we've passed tonight and previously on this to help feed the testimony for tomorrow. Before we leave this, then I just want to double check with Sue. Sue, are you feeling comfortable with the information that you have from this board now for testimony tomorrow?
Yes, I am. Thank you for all your hard work on it. And I'll be getting up really early in the morning to put the finishing touches on.
Awesome. Kim, go ahead.
I just, in the interest of disclosure, because a few of you folks have indicated that you're testifying, I am testifying in my State Board of Ed hat tomorrow. And really with respect to the process for the rules series 1300 and 2360, our role in that. I chaired a subcommittee that helped integrate the feedback on the special ed funding rules and worked with some stakeholders on that small group to bring voice and closure to that set of rules. So I think my job tomorrow is just to share the facilitated process that the state board is charged with when rule making or opening to change rules for legislation comes about, and the role that we play. I'm not completely positive why they were interested in that, but in that they are, I was asked if I would do it. There are other subject matter experts who come before me who I imagine and hope are going to share. I mean, the census-based funding group basically said, as the rules were being crafted, that we really don't know what's going to happen with the weights. So we are going to not address the weighting study. And I'm assuming someone like Megan Roy, who led the census-based funding advisory group, will speak to content matters. I couldn't have less expertise in the area, except for that which I gathered in leading that subcommittee and the stakeholders and experts that helped us formulate our final language. So just wanted to let you all know.
Thank you, Kim. And for anybody that was looking, they have Kim listed on the agenda as a former member of the State Board of Education. I am reassured after talking with Kim that she is not former, she is current. So nothing has changed there, folks.
It was
No
pretty
need to-
funny, actually. Both you and Sue sent me messages right away. And I was like, wait, did I not see an email? Is there something I should know? I know occasionally for all the other hats I wear, I get all sorts of emails at all sorts of boards that I'm on for some of the work that we're doing in our own school district. So I'm like, something happened I didn't know about. But apparently on the new version, it's been updated. Because
all right, we are happy to hear that.
Yeah.
So with that, I am going to end this portion of the evening's discussion. I want to thank you guys tremendously for your input on this. I think it's super helpful, and I'm really happy of sort of the collaborative way that we've approached all of this stuff. With that, and having Kim just recently spoken, I am going to turn to the fourth quarter financial report. And I don't know if I want to turn it over to Kim or to Carrie or to Sue or anyone.
That's Kim.
Okay, Kim, you want to?
And I think we should make it quite short tonight.
And I was going to say, Kim, I hope you can do this while also looking at the clock at the same time.
Yeah, I actually, if it would be the will of the board, it is our fourth quarter statement. We ended with the net income. The numbers sometimes at the end begin to look a little odd in that it's not reconciled with the audit yet, right, Carrie? I want to get it right. Like there's sometimes adjustments that happen after the fact that will make this look different.
And at the point that I made this report, we were mid-audit. I was like, literally, it happened the day before, and she was sending me journal entries to do the day after. So those were the numbers as of that day that I printed the reports. I have now gotten the draft audit, and by our next meeting, for sure, we'll have the final audit that'll have the final end of year numbers. Those are draft numbers.
I think that the general sentiments are in the notes, and the final numbers will be reflective of those final journal entries. That's why there were not balance sheets this time around, because those journal entries are things that that don't play well with QuickBooks. And so, am I getting that right, Carrie?
With the 10 months, that was the problem. Is QuickBooks has to have a 12-month year. So that was
month year. If you'll remember, we were comparing end of year, but 1 year was only 10 months and the other year was 12 months. So there were enough quirky things that this was sort of an abbreviated even statements, because we didn't include the balance sheets. But we don't anticipate, and even in the draft, that there were any missteps, but rather that the closing entries really play with the numbers. It's happened to us before when we've been trying to share information at the annual meetings, where we realize that some of the reconciled statements, or month over month, it'll come up where we'll see something that's different because the adjustment happened after the close. So if given the time, if people are okay with it, we promise at the September meeting, we will have the final audited end of year statements for our regular fiscal year ending June 30th. Does that work for folks?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it does.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
All right. With that item behind us, then we have to move on to election of the VSBA president for this upcoming year. So you guys do elections at this meeting. That person takes office in November, and we'll continue on for another year after that. So with that, I'll look for nominations. Mark, go ahead.
I will nominate Neil Odell.
I will second.
And you don't need to second, but I appreciate that anyways. Are there any other nominations?
All right, quickly, can you just tell me who was the nominator? Who nominated you?
Mark Schauber did.
Thank you.
All right, if there are no other nominations, I guess I will just look for a vote to confirm then, please. All those in favor of me as the president for the next year. Thank you very much. That's a Gaston. You can only use one hand, please. Only one hand. I greatly appreciate the confidence that you all have placed in me. It is not unnoticed. Is the next item I'm trying to scroll through is strategic plan monitoring report, Sue?
I'll just very quickly say the areas that I had planned to highlight were the equity work RFP that we put out. We had 9 proposals that were submitted. Then we narrowed them down to 3 to interview, and they were interviewed today. And the advisory group that we've been working with, which is a group of multiple stakeholders, gave some input on that as well. And anyway, we interviewed the 3 today, and so we'll be coming to a decision on who to choose within the next couple of weeks. So we should have they might be ready to start in September. So we should have some more news for you about that at the September meeting. Just wanted to let you know that we had a staff retreat yesterday, which was extra special because we spent the morning working and the early afternoon working really hard on our work as it relates to the strategic plan. We didn't totally finish, so we have a plan for how we're gonna work on that every week in staff meetings to stay focused on the strategic plan. But we also then had fun in the afternoon. Susan and her partner Pete treated us to a sail on Lake Champlain, which was absolutely amazing. And we got to get out of the boat and go swimming, and it was just great. And then the last thing I just wanted to let you know is that we're getting a lot more requests for training for school boards. So I'll leave it at that at the late hour. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'm going to forego comments or questions on the strategic plan monitoring report, and I'm going to go straight into the consent agenda for the evening. Mark, go ahead.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Awesome. Seconded by Amy.
Gaston. What?
And Gaston and all others. All those in favor, please raise your hands. That is unanimous. Consent agenda approved. New business. If any board member has any items that they'd like to see on a future agenda, please feel free to reach out and let me know. Any other items of new business this evening need to be discussed? No. And I will look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Nancy, seconded by Adrian. Thank you all so much. Sorry for keeping you all too late tonight. Hope you're not too hungry. Go get a beer, go get a glass of wine, have some dinner. Thanks for your work here, folks. I really appreciate it.
Thank
you.
Good night, everyone.
Susan, Sandra, Carrie, good night, everybody.